use and the neighborhood of the RLD district. So they're different contexts, but the concerns in some ways overlap. And so you can see here that and I will say that I think the comments on the incentive zoning were very much knowing how it would be used, because we had seen the particular incentive zoning for German Brothers Marina in November. And so when this came here, it was pretty obvious to me, and Jim, welcome to his own perspective on that, that people were looking at this in relation to that. That incentive zoning is a rezoning. And to just be cognizant of that, like if you're taking lands that are RLD zoned and you're rezoning them to something else, to consider the full implications of that, to consider, there's a lot of things for any incentive zoning site, for this one in particular, that the town board is balancing in terms of, neighborhood character and lake access and other comprehensive plan goals, which hopefully you are more aware of than I might necessarily be able to call up. And, natural features, like what's the impact of not so much necessarily the intensity of the land use, but the intensity of the lake use. It wasn't really clear from the German Brothers thing what the increment was, because that concept plan didn't provide a lot of details on, how much parking, how much mooring, how much stocking was existing to be able to compare it. So those were some of the concerns that are reflected in the comments in the minutes from County Planning Board. And, Jim may have other things to add.
Not specific to our discussions, but as a professor in urban planning, I just want to, remind everyone or make you aware that incentive zoning is a market-based planning tool, and it requires expertise and capacity to not only implement it, but to manage it from project to project. And there are good resources available through the American Planning Association. This one, for example, incentive zoning, the Planning Advisory Service report, and there are other articles. There was a recent article from a professor at Cornell and University of Binghamton on incentive zoning. And there are a couple of points I would like to make. There's a long history in major cities implementing incentive zoning and then regretting it because they gave away the store or something. The bonuses didn't come close to matching the value that the developer received from the incentive zoning. New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Seattle. There's a long and sordid history from the 60s on where they've tried to implement this and got it wrong. They've had to go back and revise their zoning code, revise their incentive zoning. So I'm not saying it's not a good idea or it's not possible, but it requires expertise to do it well, and perhaps even hiring a consultant who's done many of these. In New York State, it looks like there's something like 18% of the municipalities that do have incentive zoning, and that's pretty consistent nationwide. And the biggest challenge is getting the price right. What are you getting? What sort of public goods are you receiving? And are there unintended social costs? More traffic, visual blight, problems with, lake access. I mean, there are all kinds of issues depending on what the site, where the site is. And the lakefront in particular, I think, has the potential to be a great place to apply incentive zoning because there's very little public access to the lake. There are very few restaurants on the lake, which obviously are terrific amenities, for example. But it depends, it's site by site, has to be considered. And you really have to be careful with cost benefit analysis to not give away the store essentially and do what all these other major cities have done over the last 50 years. It should be linked to the comprehensive plan. You know, there should be a planning process that identifies what are the public goals? What are the public goods that you're trying to receive from incentive zoning? It could be affordable housing. It could be public access to the lake. There are lots of public goods that can be part of a incentive zoning ordinance. But it's really clear to have all your ducks in a row before you start implementing that, I think. Because the history is pretty clear that mistakes have been made and regrets have resulted from other big cities that have huge planning staffs and you think they would know what they're doing. But they've, you know, they haven't always, and they've had to go back and completely revise things. And once things get built, obviously, as you know, they're there for 50, 100 years or more. So that's my sort of professorial overview of the topic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Greg.
Jim, is that correct?
Yeah,
I want to make sure that, so I've been helping Peter Brew on Twin Brothers Marina as a town resident.
Okay.
And we have picked off all 8 of the updated comprehensive plan of what the community wants to see. And we have met all of them.
Okay.
You know, and I'm a little curious, you know, I don't think we should compare San Francisco to Canandaigua, the town of Canandaigua. You know, there's principles that follow behind that form. You gotta have some form and structure to get this done, right?
Sure.
We all know.
Right.
And so applying those in the correct ways of the utmost importance.
Right.
So I just encourage, as we go through this process with the town, that we would continue to like to stay in touch with the county also, because on a referral basis, right?
Yeah.
And but because you guys have a lot to add, right? You've seen a lot, right? Right.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to make sure that you understand that 8 for 8 on the 21 update plan for meeting the needs of the community. Townwide.
Yeah, conceptually that's great, but you know, the detail, devil's in the details.
Damn right.
And I'll also say, as an urban designer, design quality that, you know, if you were gonna have open heart surgery, would you go to a certain small rural community hospital that might do 1 every 5 years? Or would you go to the Cleveland Clinic where they're doing 5 a day? You know, expertise matters, design expertise is not uniform. Not everybody can do it well. And same thing with engineering or anything else. So I really encourage you to pay attention to the details. I think it's great what you just said, but I would want to see specifics.
Excellent.
And, you know, it is as Jim said, a market-based planning tool. That does put the municipality in a different situation because the applicant is always going to have more details about the finances of the project than the reviewers are. And so, you know, you can ask a lot of questions, you can get some information, some confidential information possibly to make your decision, but you're still going to have to apply your judgment in, you know, speaking not at all about Canandaigua, but, you know, in a lot of rural communities, there's a sense if we ask for too much, that, you know, this project that we want that achieves goals will go away. And really the question you need to ask yourself is the question Jim's asking: in 50 years, will this still be a good project for the communities? And so, you know, that we know from the places that we enjoy vacationing that holding a high bar adds value in the long run, not, you know, grasping after whatever comes one's way.
And we're looking at a couple different incentive zoning projects, not just the Brothers Marina. So, which is why we wanted to have you guys in to talk about, you know, where we are with incentive zoning, really, to be honest.
Yeah, backing up just a little bit from, putting the incentive zoning and the German Brothers Marina project together. Initially, what we did was we had incentive zoning available as a tool in just a few zoning districts. And well over a year ago, we decided that it should be townwide. And that was the update to the code that we proposed. The German Brothers Marina, I'm an old guy, so my memory isn't still clear all the time, but came about after we started the discussion about including all zoning districts in. Our mistake was made that we didn't route, that proposed change in local law through the Ontario County Planning. And so, this effort to correct that began, right between Christmas and New Year's. We forwarded, I think there were 3 different local laws that needed to be commented on by county planning board. So to me, they're 2 separate issues. If we're going to have incentive zoning, excuse me, available as a tool in our toolbox, which I think we should. My opinion, I'm speaking for the board, but should apply to all zoning districts, not be relegated to just 1 or 2 that might be looked at as a less desirable neighborhood, so let's use it there. So from my standpoint, that's the issue. How this German Brothers Marina or any future projects relate with that's to be determined. And I agree with everything that both of you said, that you really have to look at the detail, because that is where the devil likes to hide out. And I think that our town board, our town planning board would look at details. And the thing that's foremost in everybody's mind, I've been on the town board now for 14 years, is protecting that lake. That's foremost in our comprehensive plan, all of our planning documents, all of our thrust as a town. And we do have other areas that we'll probably be considering using incentive zoning for less matters of maybe lower importance in a way of speaking. But we've only used it once in the past, the village project on Middle Cheshire Road and bypass. It was pulled into allow greater density of housing there. And that was 20 years, no, not quite 20 years, 15 to 20 years ago, I guess, Chuck. So but anyway, they're 2 different things to me, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. And your comments are valuable, and any project that comes before our board or the planning board would be looked at and scrutinized to make sure that all those impacts are well recognized, and that any amenities that are offered for the changes in code balance, to the greatest degree. And I know with the one project that we had, the villas, I was and I chaired the committee from the town that negotiated with the developer to get the amenities, and it was very difficult to get agreement from the developer to provide those amenities. And after the fact, and the project, it was approved by the town board and went ahead. And it's pretty much completed now, but holding them to that and getting those amenities delivered in with some of the amenities, not all of them, was very difficult. And it is you do have to know what you're doing, as you say. You get into it, you get prepared to fight your way through it.
Right, well, it's a negotiation, and it should be difficult, because developers, if they're eager to do it, then maybe you're not getting enough for the value provided. But you need a enforceable development agreement, clearly. the other question I would ask is, have you looked at model ordinances, the American Planning is,
I don't believe we have.
because there are model incentive zoning ordinances.
Where would we look at them?
APA, I mean, the website, you have to be a member, I'm a member.
Yeah, I don't know. And we subscribe to the Planners Advisory Service.
Yeah.
I'm
We could
not
provide
as
that.
familiar with this stuff. Thank you for bringing this.
Yeah.
to the
Is
table.
there a formula that you look at for incentive zoning, like? What kind of tit for tat is there out?
Well, I mean, it's, if it were easy,
Right.
everybody would do it.
There'd be a
Right.
formula.
So there's a lot of judgment there. It's cost benefit analysis.
Right,
essentially.
right.
I
And-
believe that the New York State enabling legislation, kind of like for a zone use variance, requires. I can't think exactly what the language is, but like I'm most comfortable when there's an attempt to monetize whatever the incentives are. Obviously, a density incentive is relatively easy. You know, a single family home, it costs this much, a lot costs this much. If you allow multifamily, the value is this, and that's relatively easy. Other things like allowing a use that wouldn't otherwise be permitted or not having to go through a special use permit process are much less clear about what the economic value is. But I think it's worth asking the applicant to go through that exercise as part of the negotiations. So that there's that information that's shared and that there's that transparency back to the public. And I would say, what I've seen one really good example and a lot that's, sometimes they're less than what I really like to see being, if I were a decision maker, which I'm not.
What are both of your thoughts on the change from incentive zoning, being in particular zoning districts of the town versus overall for the entire town?
I think of this, if you have a strong ordinance and a strong process for assessing costs and benefits, it's a tool, So if the tool is well designed and applied fairly and accurately in every case, then in theory, it could go anywhere. But there are risks, especially along the lakefront, they're huge risks because you make a mistake and it's visible for, the rest of our lifetimes for sure, and probably our grandkids. There are different methods of evaluating cost and benefit. There are different approaches. For example, if you're going to allow, 100 more housing units on a site, you can look at how much would it cost for the developer to buy the land to put 100 units on, and then that's part of the value of providing that density bonus. And there, I have this report that I could share with you, APA Planning Advisory Service. It's a little outdated now. It's like from 2000. But then the model ordinance is more recent than that. But it provides a lot of context that it could be helpful to you.
Mhm.
Maybe back up just a little bit. Our ordinance was primarily created by our former town manager and town attorney. That's my understanding, the origin of it. It wasn't individual town board members that crafted it. We commented on it and massaged it, certainly, it's our responsibility, but
Right.
it came from them, and he was very experienced in professional management, municipal management, so I mean, that's the origin of the document itself, just so
Yeah.
it wasn't pulled out of.
The
air
origin
or
of the
anything like that.
changes that were proposed in 2020.
So it's, yeah, I'm not exactly sure where we're headed from here, but I would think that any now that you're our representative to Ontario County Planning Board, I think I heard you volunteer to participate in any negotiation. Not too sure, but
You heard me correct.
good, I'm glad to hear that, so you all heard them, so recorded.
That would be very helpful.
That would be.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to.
Yeah, very, very helpful.
Linda, do you know what the county's comments were on it? I don't.
Yeah, no, I have them here in front of me, and so I was speaking to them. you know, it has to, the official comments have on the adding the incentive zoning, from,
Sorry.
Before when you guys
Yeah,
were doing this,
I just went through it. It was Sorry, go ahead.
that's okay, from the referral on the January 2024 County Planning Board, referral 18/2024. About what's the impact to like water quality, natural resources, comprehensive plan priorities. Impact to existing property owners. And the intent of existing zoning districts, you know, just that balance of, are you appropriately changing the intent, or are you undermining goals that were established when the existing district was
Was
established?
created. And it's not an overlay, when we do incentive zoning, it's not an overlay, it's a straight up new
Right,
zoning. for the
right.
district, correct?
And I will say, like, sort of while I'm here at the ordinance committee, that some of the processes that the town of Canandaigua has in place for places where the town wants a lot of discretion are pretty complicated. You know, the whole, you're sort of rezoned, but you're not really zoned till you're rezoned for the SCAR and for the, I think we just saw in February, a mixed use district. MUO. You know, for me, it can get confusing. I imagine for people in the community and changing town staff and boards. You know, in some ways, incentive zoning can be a little more straightforward than that, but, you know, just to think about, I understand the reason for the MXU, and I guess I'll also say, like, you can't pre-regulate good design. You know, like, let's just, zoning is a blunt tool. And so to that extent, incentive zoning gives you the opportunity to sharpen your pencil and really look at a particular project and whether a particular project is appropriate in a particular location at a particular scale with particular impacts.
One of the difficulties we had with the German Brothers project is that some areas of it are not fully defined as to what they're looking to put in that location, which has made it really difficult to analyze if the cost benefit analysis and everything else, if there's a section that's not clear as to what's going there. Would you recommend approving something with there being a question as to what goes into a part of it, for instance?
I would think, you know, just like any other site plan, you know, if somebody has 100 acres and they want to do something with 10, you would ask them to lay out, at least conceptually, sort of the whole thing. Or you know, I'm guessing that the planning board would, because without thinking through the access or, you know, those other things, you can lock in something that then doesn't make sense.
Yeah, my concern with it being incentive zoning is that if the incentive zoning becomes the new zoning for the area, and part of the incentive zoning is not defined, then what actually is the zoning for that area? So-
Well, and you need to really think, okay, this property is unzoned except for what's in this incentive zoning resolution.
Yeah.
So, you know, every setback, every lot size, every use, you know, what you're gonna allow, all of that has to be specified. And I'm glad that I remembered this again, that whole because this is probably not all at once project. Like, at what milestones are different amenities required to be provided?
Timelines, same.
I think we're getting into a critique of the German Brothers Marina project. And to me, that's kind of a subset of this. Fundamental question is, our incentive zoning ordinance,
Right.
that has to be resolved first before, you know, I mean, are we going to make it townwide? Are we going to restrict it to certain areas? Are we going to have it at all? I mean, that's, our intent was to have it, you know, of course, spread across the whole town. Well, to me, that's a question that really has to be answered. Everything you said, yeah, you have to do all those things, and I believe that they would be done. with respect, and I don't want to prolong the debate on German Brothers, but we never got to that point. Because we couldn't get agreement. And give and take. And, you know, speaking only for myself, it's a dead issue. We're not going to have this proposal as we had seen, which was never really fully fleshed out. So, but I think we have to resolve the question of, is it even going to be used in that area? So if we're not going to include it, then kind of a moot point, so.
But I think one of the objectives of having you guys here
Yeah.
is to flesh out incentive zoning for us and where we want to go. I mean, I've just learned a whole lot about this topic, which is very grateful for you both coming in. And it sounds like we have a resource that we can use as the town of Canandaigua from the county, which is actually very nice.
The point I'll make about the design issue is you have to have a conceptual plan. You know, a bubble diagram tells you land uses roughly where they're at, but it doesn't tell you anything about the architecture, the massing, the style, the fenestration, all the things that go into a great building. Or the landscape, you know, how are plantings used? How are hard spaces used? Is it just poured concrete or is it some nice material? What about lighting? What about stormwater management? All these issues are design issues, and that's what site planning is all about, putting all these things together. And if you could have really good component parts, but if they're in the wrong spots, it's not a very good design. So you need expertise. And, you know, a lot of communities create design guidelines for their incentive zoning because you don't want to keep the bar here if you're awarding bonuses to a developer. You want to raise the bar. And there are great examples all over the country where that's been done effectively. So I just encourage people to think about raising the bar in terms of design quality if you're going to be awarding development bonuses through this ordinance.
Jim, should that be included in the incentive zoning ordinance itself, or people directed to consider all of those issues when you get into that part of the process?
It could be a separate document, but it needs to be referenced in the.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah,
you know, how much, if you've read through our ordinance, I'm sure by now,
yeah.
and would you be willing to critique that for us and say, well, hey, here's some holes I see in it?
I would do it with Linda if she'd be willing to.
My recollection is I know the state legislation is very broad and you know, most municipal incentive zonings grant great leeway to town boards in what amenities they will and want to accept and what incentives they are looking for. So I can't particularly speak to the town of Canandaigua's, but you can, you know, you can be more definitive about, you know, sort of what comprehensive plan objectives are sort of subject to incentive zoning. And I'm also thinking about the question that's really on the table, that is it appropriate to have incentive zoning townwide? And you know, I'm thinking about the places where it's being added to the Southern Quarter overlay districts, the RLD, and I forget, I think there's the form-based, yeah,
Form-based,
uptown, and the mixed use. That you know, sort of in uptown, it's kind of like, what's the purpose of applying it there? You know, is it just, we're gonna say it's townwide? In RLD, I think that it's a very different question applying it for a water dependent use than for a not water dependent use. You know, the weighing of the impacts to the existing neighborhood, I think should be different because, you know, a density amenity, I think, you know, a development density amenity should be weighed, or could be very easily weighed differently than a increasing lake access and like affordable housing, it just isn't ever gonna be a part of something in an RLD district, or, some of the other things that might be on your amenity list.
That's a good point. A lot of communities focus incentive zoning on specific areas like Washington DC and the region around DC. In the 80s and 90s and even to today, there's a lot of incentive zoning based around transit stations. If you've ever been to DC, the higher density, really beautiful urban plazas, all these public amenities, that's because they've used incentive zoning for those particular areas. They don't use it absolutely everywhere. They target it where they want higher density development and more public amenities. So you could look at it as places where you want to encourage higher density mixed use development, smart growth, sustainable land uses. You could target it there and try to get a higher quality form of development, as opposed to just allowing it to go anywhere. As somebody is building a 60-acre single family housing development, what sort of public amenities are you going to get? Perhaps they dedicate parkland. That could be one. It's a different set of incentives or a different set of public benefits, depending on where the development is in the county.
So why would you choose areas for incentive zoning and not just do it across? I mean, what would be the negative of then the town board would have the ability,
Yeah.
or the planning board would have the ability to say, you've brought this project to us, we like it very much.
Right. Right. The only downside is that it increases the risk and the complexity and the demand for expertise. And, if you have the expertise on staff, then, welcome to it. But the county is huge.
Yeah.
And you have to be very clear about what bonuses you want. What something that happens on the lake is, you're probably going to be looking at a different set of public goods as opposed to
Sure.
20 miles
Form-based
away.
code, right, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And rightfully so, sure.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
So I mean, I feel like, it's not like a bright line, don't do it in these other areas, but just make sure you know what you're doing.
It just seems to me that it's another tool that's available. It has to be used judiciously. It has to be
Right.
used in the right manner.
Right.
So why not have it available? But then, my experience, I was on the planning board, I chaired the planning board 20 years ago. Our town really, as we got into this century, started modernizing, I'll use that word, but we were kind of very rural and kind of introverted in the past. And as the town started to grow, I think we became a little bit more sophisticated in our approach to codes and everything really. And it's as that growth occurred, we tried to keep up with bringing in people that are knowledgeable and can help us. And in this particular area, we've only used it once. And I think we made a comment earlier that there's some in Ontario County, there's some communities that use incentive zoning and
Farmington uses it a lot. I mean,
Right.
any of the major developments, like Auburn Junction, which is where the new U of R medical offices are and the storage buildings are behind them. Hathaway Corners was incentive zoning. There's a couple more that are in the process. One, some frontage was maybe a general business and light industrial, and the back was residential. And
Do they use it everywhere or is it?
oops. I would say that any significant development in Farmington during my 5 or 6 years or 7 years, I don't know how many years it's been, with the board has involved incentive zoning. So
But it
they
could
use
be-
it quite extensively.
but are they all in one part of the town
Um,
or is it spread out more?
They're mostly in the 332 quarter. They're often mixed use, involve a mix of commercial and residential uses. They have some things about, auto uses and spacing and special use permits, so sometimes that's part of the incentive package. Farmington, has used incentives or amenities for sidewalks, for water and sewer improvements. Actually, they're amassing money to do a force main upgrade that they're gonna need. And there's certain other town comprehensive plan objectives that they're not using incentive zoning for. Personally, I would be interested to see them consider, okay, if you're truly serious about focusing development in the 332 corridor and not in the agricultural lands, it's a similar concept as Canandaigua. How are you preserving the long-term agricultural lands? And they haven't done any of that. Like, if you will permanently preserve some open space elsewhere, then you'll be entitled to these incentives. So, I mean, that's sort of just a whole nother way to apply, or as I was thinking, about narrowing down versus keeping broad, one of the other uses that I could imagine this incentive zoning be put to is raising the density beyond what a cluster would allow, either for agricultural preservation or for some very significant natural resource, to, like the floodplain or the wetland or perhaps the steep slope. You might have other tools. But in terms of avoiding, fragmentation or really having some more buffer space around those resources or, other objectives, it might make sense to increase a density beyond what a cluster would allow.
Well, the one time incentive zoning was used in the town of Canandaigua for the village project that I mentioned earlier. We did. One of the amenities was preservation of some wetland off Middle Churchill Road. For 40 acres of land. I mean, it wasn't something that actually touched on the development itself in the vicinity, but
So an offsite.
we did tie in,
Yeah,
because that, as you said, New York State does give you a lot of leeway,
Mhm.
and so we took advantage of it. And
Is there a online question, did you say?
Yes, there is an online question. Marion Cassie asked, as a basic question to the Ontario County Planning Board, I would like to know if the incentive zoning code is written, structured correctly.
I'm not prepared to give a definitive question to that. Like, I think it's adequate. I mean, this review was particularly focused on the amendments to the code and the location amendments. As you can tell from other comments, if I see something else that's sort of not related, I'll typically comment on it. So I don't think there's anything egregious about it, but as we've discussed, generally the state enabling legislation and the town enabling legislation be very broad. And so, it's your prerogative if you want to further define that in terms of what's allowed and not allowed, or just to be more clear in intent or to references to the comprehensive plan. So I haven't recently reread that part, but I think while you're looking at that, that's worth saying, is there anything else that we want to say, either in the list of incentives, in the list of amenities, or in the sort of preamble purpose intent statement that will not necessarily weed out, but I think the other discussion that might be useful to have is, are there certain things that somebody might propose that we would know without a lot of analysis, yeah, we're not interested in that. you know, I think the exercise of thinking that through might be useful.
Yeah, and I have to confess, it's been a while since I looked at it, and I didn't look at it with the intent of giving you a full-blown critique, but my guess is that there's room for improvement. And you mentioned offsite, bonuses. That's another option. You can, include in your list of amenities community amenities that you'd like to see is more or less like an impact fee. If you want to increase public bike ped trails in the county, that could be one of the carrots that you could dangle out in an incentive zoning situation, because it's obviously expensive to acquire land and build stuff and maintain it, but as a new resident to the county, I see a real lack of public access and good bike ped paths. But there's, it's a beautiful county, and it's like, that's a shame. That's a missed opportunity.
Mhm.
And when we review development proposals, not just in the town of Canandaigua, but we see a lot of these, I would call them sprawl development, subdivisions of, housing developments surrounded by cornfields, and, kids grow up in those places, and where do they have to bike or walk to? Nowhere,
It's a pet peeve of mine as well. So.
Yeah.
And mind. In Farmington, not so much. I don't know about Auburn Junction. I didn't see as an incentive zoning. I can't remember. I don't think there was necessarily sidewalk stuff as part of Hathaway's, but they've since done more of a comprehensive sidewalk plan, and recognizing that there are a lot of subdivisions that were built without a thought to how can you get from place to place, and they now have an overall plan for, being able to get a lot of people to town parks, to commercial areas. And so their newest incentive zoning project, which will be on the March agenda, includes significant off-site sidewalk. It's the property that was the water park property. So many of you probably know not at the corner, but southeast of County Road 41 and 332. And so this developer is putting in sidewalks in front of the police barracks as well as along their frontage to really, connect a significant.
Kind of a sidewalk envisionment plan.
We got one of those.
Well, I think we could go on for a long time. I think we've got a number of asks of you folks, and we'll follow up. Either myself or Sarah will follow up, and we would really like to take advantage of your expertise in developing our incentive zoning, revising our incentive zoning process. So I can't thank you enough for both coming, and you've given us a lot to think about. So thank you very much. So
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's what you get for volunteering.
I've been doing it since I was there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm sure we'll see some long-term rentals, and, I say to the board all the time, like, anybody who has them amends them frequently, so pay attention to what their amendments are, so that not everybody has to learn from the experience of others. And my other example of that is, like, Farmington didn't say you can't live in your mini storage just randomly. They said it because they'd seen it. So, just, and I think someplace, you see the standard comment, like, if it's a building that I think anybody might want a short-term rental, like, just sort of put this on your code enforcement officer, keep an eye on building. Like, yeah, it might really be a man cave, but it might not really be a man cave.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Well, that was great. Got certainly some resources to go after that. Will not cost us anything. So that'll be
Make you
wonderful.
wonder about the intersection of mixed-use overlay districts and incentive zoning. Is there unique forms or
What's the difference?
Sounds like Jim has some experience with some of that we could probably go forward with, so.
The thought that all those projects in Farmington are incentive zoning is not positive to me. I feel like the growth in Farmington is a little terrifying right now.
Well, it's a different conversation for us. Like, we should really get after short-term rentals. Everyone, there's a copy of short-term rental. Code that Sarah and Chris worked on. So let's open the floor. Is Chris on?
Yeah,
Yeah, he was up there.
I am.
I have a bunch of comments if you want me to go first.
Go ahead.
The easiest one is on what is kind of page 4. We've talked to Sarah about this. The lettering is off, so it just needs to be switched to L through Q instead of repeating the JKs in there. And also under what is currently K, number 7, that we, not that I don't appreciate it, but we indicate that no events are allowed twice, which, you know, can be a great thing, but it's not necessary.
Exercise.
So those are the easy ones. Back to page 3, under number 3, maximum occupancy. The zoning inspector shall establish maximum overnight occupancy in accordance with the uniform code. I don't have an issue with, doing that based on uniform code. My issue is with, if I were either a short-term rental owner or someone reviewing this, it's very hard to understand what that means. Like, I sat down with Mike and we figured out for a particular property, you know, how big the space would be to allow how many people or what have you. But that was almost a 45-minute conversation that we had about that. So I'd love there to be some sort of examples that's a little bit more clear as to, you know, is it based on square footage of the bedroom, dimensions of bed, whatever it may be, like something that clarifies that so that someone reading this could understand what that could possibly mean. You know what I mean?
I think you just made your point. It's complicated.
It's very
You can't put
complicated.
that in the code.
I
It's gonna
know.
Be a conversation with Mike Murphy and reading the
Is-
code. And if we reference it word for word in here, then.
That we
state
launched
changes.
ourselves in.
Well, no, well, yeah, or, well, no, because you always have to go back to the state
Change it
anyway.
back.
Anytime they make a change, then you have to change your code. So I think it's left that way purposely.
So then maybe in this setting, we can talk about what it means. What does
Yeah.
that actually mean?
That's. Let me just pull up real quick. Biggest one, is I wouldn't be able to put it in here, because truthfully, I would just be copying, pasting all New York State property maintenance code. And
Okay.
it's okay, I've been keeping it up there, you're good. So the biggest ones, obviously your size, I will correct myself. And about 40 other code enforcement officers, we were all wrong in our interpretation of the code. We reached out to New York State, got 3 separate opinions. It's not 70 square feet plus 50. It's 70 square foot minimum for the first occupant, and then it's 50 square feet for every occupant after. So basically,
2 would be 120.
so for 2 it'd be 100.
50 square feet per person, but for one person, you have to have a minimum of 70. 70 for 1, 100 for 2, 150 for 3.
So after one person, it's 50 per square foot per person. is
Yeah.
What you're saying, right?
And
No,
we
it's not.
all interpreted it that way for the last
20?
4
30
years.
more for the second person.
The only one that's different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, whereas we all took it as, well, it's 70 and 50 per each occupant, that's what every code enforcement.
So if
officer-
you've got a 500 square foot bedroom, that's 10 people.
Yes,
That's a lot of people.
500 square foot bedroom is a big bedroom.
Yeah.
25 by 25,
yeah,
it's a 25 by 25 room. I mean, you could have.
But that's the state code.
Yes.
So I mean, we
Yep.
have to, I mean, in my mind, have to stick with that.
25, more than 500.
so there's other things in there,
625.
so we have. Basically, the biggest ones obviously gonna be the size, then you have privacy, or the egress issues, you've got stuff like that. Other ones are gonna be light and ventilation, so any habitable space has to have enough. What's called total glazed area, that's just basically your light coming through your windows, has to equal 8%. So your square footage of these windows must equal at minimum 8% of your total floor area. Same goes for ventilation. Ventilation is total openable area, can never say that word quickly.
Openable?
Openable area of the window in each room shall be equal to, not less than or equal to 45% of the minimum glazed area. So now I'm taking that 8% from the light. I have to take 45% of that, and that's how much openable window space you have to have. So to really like lay this out for
Okay,
someone,
no,
it
it's
gets
more
really
the-
tough.
It's more the square footage amount that is, it's just what square footage equals what amount of people in a bedroom is really the main.
We can do that. The one issue that I would caution on is that we get a lot of, well, I can turn my living room into a.
That's
I
what,
can
yeah,
turn
and that's
this
what I,
closet into a bedroom. I
Yeah.
can, and you can, but we have to be careful on our side, because if they just draw out their floor
It has
plan and they
other-
say
yeah.
bedroom,
Mhm.
we've got to check out all that stuff. So we can do that. That's no problem.
That's the only two conditions,
What's that
that's what you just mentioned here,
for?
for light and.
No, I just mentioned like 5.
Okay,
Size, egress, privacy, light,
Glaze.
ventilation.
Ventilation.
I can't have a cooking facility in there, so
yeah, no, I mean, my
Yeah.
concern is it's hard to approve that, not knowing what that equals, right? Like, I need to know if you have a 20 by 25 foot bedroom.
but I-
You know, like, and that's 10 people. I mean, there are 20 by 25 foot bedrooms. That's not
But I-
unheard of.
But how do we legislate against that? If that's the code that's out
That's what
there?
I'm saying.
But I mean, I don't think we can say, I don't think we can put a number on it. I think we have to go with that. And if they've got these huge bedrooms, why do we discriminate against a big bedroom versus a 100 square foot bedroom? You know what I mean? It's hard to do that.
Mind if I just jump in here for a second?
You should go ahead.
The two factors that I see in this code that manage the occupancy as it's currently written is the number of parking spots and the maximum occupancy per building. Which in this code, as written, it's 3 people per parking space and 16 people per dwelling.
That's only for the ones that need to go to the planning board.
That's
Right.
Those are really the two areas now where we are managing or limiting, let me say. Regulating is probably a better word, where we are regulating the occupancy. So the number of people staying in a particular bedroom. Yes, it's important, but really what's more important now per the way this is written is how many parking spaces are at the building.
Agreed, and that's my concern with it, is I don't wanna, I mean, we see enormous structures sometimes built in our town. I don't necessarily wanna approve the possibility of short-term rentals that are 40 people. You know, that becomes a hotel,
Mm.
you know, and that's.
Had a lot of conversation about that.
Yeah,
But wouldn't that have to go to the planning board?
yeah, it
This
would.
is written,
Right,
yes.
yes. So I mean, that could be regulated, right?
to jump in from a staff standpoint, we're not regulating at 16. Right, so we're not saying the maximum you can have is 16. If you have a house that can accommodate 20, you're asking for 16. Staff is gonna list your maximum occupancy at 20. Because that's what.
You
the
have
code
square
says.
footage, right.
You have, that's what we're basing this off of. It's not a, I want. This is you're able.
Your facility
Your
will accommodate
facility
this,
can
right?
accommodate this. That's what we're labeling your maximum occupancy as. When I go into a restaurant for the town. that's how it's the same
75,
exact
right,
way.
yeah.
So if we, from a staff standpoint, say your maximum occupancy is 40, you're going straight to planning board. Sorry, nothing we can do.
Even though you're gonna have 16.
If
Right.
we go through, we do the measurements, you're at 15, okay,
Oh, I see what you're saying. So
here's your permit, you're good.
your structure is gonna depend whether you go to the planning board or not. So if you have a structure, your
Yeah.
short-term rental, and you could accommodate 20 people, doesn't matter. You're going to the planning board regardless of you want to have it for 10.
Yep.
That
That's
seems,
how we do maximum
That's-
occupancy for every building.
that,
Right, the
That
occupancy
seems-
is not up for debate, it is
Right.
what it is.
right.
And that's identified by item X on the last page. Where it says short-term rentals with a maximum occupancy over 16. Shall obtain a special use permit. Now. I'll just also comment, we had a lot of conversation about this and the committee. was concerned about the number 16. I personally wanted it at 16 and every other member of the committee wanted it at 12.
Yeah.
And
that's-
because the concern was that it felt like more of a commercial enterprise at 16 than it did at a lesser number.
I think it's
Right.
a commercial enterprise at 2. I mean,
It is,
renting a house
in
out
essence,
for-
yeah.
But if you're renting a house out and you're having, you know, your family there, that might be 2 families together, it's not that hard to get to
Oh, no.
over 12.
Oh, it is.
Well, that's not what the code currently says, Dave. Guests are allowed to visit
Well,
up to
But I'm saying,
2
2 people
per,
might come to that house as 2 families coming together and
Yeah.
they might rent that out. It's not, I mean, that's why people rent short-term rentals out because they're typically gathering or whatever. We have someone here who does it for a living, and what do you typically see?
Families coming together, that's what the lake experience is all about.
Right, right,
New homes are built larger so that families can sleep together and
right.
kids can all go into one spot. It's the architectural design of lake homes these days.
Right.
So to your concern, if you're about any decision you make here, you have a permitting process. If there's a problem at a home, you can always pull the permit regardless. And I think you'll see that once this law's executed in full, you're gonna get compliance just because you have that leverage to pull the permit. Very few people will do it bad because they need the revenue. So I guess I'm just saying, don't be scared of making a decision about the unlikely what ifs, because you've got that control.
Okay, so can I just go through a couple more that I've got on this one, because it's a big change from what we had in the past, but, the no events one, number F there, it's back on page 3, right on the other one I was talking about. It says, I actually, I really like, I think we had one of our guests last time recommend this as, the daytime use people, being twice the amount of a maximum occupancy for overnight guests. The only question I have in this one is we still aren't really defining what events are, which that's been something people brought up. And secondly, the term overnight, I think instead of terming something overnight, it would be better to give an hour past 7, past 9, past 11, whatever it is, because you know, overnight means different things to different people, and the whole reason for not overnight is, again, not wanting parties. So if somebody says, well, they didn't sleep here, they left at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's not overnight, but that sure is a party, you know?
Sarah,
So-
Sarah, Mike, what do you think about that? I mean, is putting a number in there something? I mean,
And I wouldn't expect.
and raises a good point.
I wouldn't
My
expect you to be
overnight
sitting
is-
there at 9 and going, you know, you
Right.
gotta get out of here,
That's
you know,
what-
that's.
That's why we left
That's
it
why,
to-
just from a staff, and I can't speak for code enforcement, but I work next to them every day. When you add in more definitive stuff, not that you shouldn't, I mean, it's up to you guys as a board, but we're enforcing it. Code enforcement is enforcing it. Zoning inspectors are the ones who have to figure all this out. So as soon as you put in a time, that means, well, what do you want us to do? Are
It
you
gives us,
asking us to drive around at
absolutely
11
not,
PM
no,
to all
but it
the
gives a
current permit
definition,
holders? You
it
know
gives a
what I mean?
definition for a complainer too, right? So
It
so if I'm the
does.
next door neighbor and I'm like, you know what, that party's going on, it's 11 PM and this says not past 11 PM, boom, you've got it visible late.
I don't want to send Mike out somewhere as an overnight thing and say, I just have somebody say, it's 1 o'clock, overnight to me is 2 o'clock. So, I mean, I hear the arbitrary thing. So what's the negative of putting a number in? Is that,
So I would instill trust in staff to let it be discretionary at our expense. Because I can guarantee you, the second that you say 9 o'clock, well.
getting a lot of calls?
We'd
You're
have
gonna
to,
get a lot of calls.
we'd have
right?
to agree on a time. I'd say 9 o'clock, someone would say 10,
Yeah.
but also the neighbor is gonna wait.
Yeah,
The neighbor is gonna wait till it's 9:01. I'm gonna get 15 phone calls at
Okay.
9:01.
so I think we have to put the boots in on the ground and the law here together, I think. And I think that,
Chris too, what, I mean, if there.
Yeah, I was just about to chime in here. I want to caution against legislating against the worst possible scenario. Now, the worst possible scenario is someone has a 16-person house, they have 32 people over, and they're screaming and they're playing loud music, and they're drinking and they're just being obnoxious and the neighbors are miserable. And that's the worst case scenario. What putting a specific hour on, it would prevent that worst case scenario, but it would also mean that if you brought 3 people over and you're all sitting around the fire at 9 o'clock at night, the renter has to hustle all his guests who came to his lake house that he rented out. Say, oh geez, it's 9:01. You got to get out of here. And so and I don't think we really care about that, but what it's going to do is encourage violation. And you want to avoid making a law that is going to be violated. People are going to say, well, it's 9:05 and I've got 3 people sitting around the fireplace. What's going to happen? The law has mechanisms built into it to prevent the worst case scenario. There's a violation, a complaint process, and how we handle violations with fines and suspension of the permit. And that's how we keep the worst case scenario from happening. But in my opinion, having a few guests over and sitting quietly around a fire is the best case scenario. That's what you want on your lake. You want people coming to Canandaigua and saying, what a great lake. That town wasn't weird and made me leave at a specific time. So you want to avoid going overboard. I guess that's what I would chime in with there.
I think to your point though, Adeline, what's an event?
Yeah, we've still never defined.
Is sitting around a campfire an event? And potentially the way this is written, you could have 48 people at a home. And it's not considered an event. The way this
No, sorry.
I asked, this is what it says.
No, what it says is that the maximum number you can have is, say, 48 people.
That's right.
But it also says you can't have events. And
Right.
to address the previous question, what an event is, I think anybody's going to say having 48 people in one property is an event, right?
Not per this.
If you've got a 20-person
Not per this,
occupancy
Chris.
allowed and 40 people come over, it's allowed under this.
It's allowed
As
to
long
have
as they don't
48
sleep.
people at a residence right now per the way this is written. And it's not considered an event.
As long as they're gone before sunrise the following morning, they haven't stayed overnight, really.
And that's
I mean,
per,
what it
that's
says.
per number N under 201.7. No events. No events shall be allowed and guests are permitted provided that the amount of guests, and that should be number of guests, not exceed twice the amount of the maximum occupancy. So if the occupancy is 16, you can have an additional 32 people for a total of 48 people at the home and not be considered an event.
That's a question. So I think that the intent of that is 16, twice that amount is a total of 32,
That-
not 16 plus
Plus
32. But you're right, that's not very clear either.
No, that's
Not the way it's written.
So Mike, you're the guy going out for events.
Yeah.
What's your
So we don't,
opinion?
so Chris, don't yell at me. So again, it's subjective. From a code standpoint, I don't like subjective, but that's the world we live in. I've got to go from first New York State. New York State does not define events. From there, the law says I have to go to the town ordinance. Town ordinance does not define events. From there, I have to go to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and that's what everyone does. An event is something that happens, a noteworthy happening, a social occasion or activity, an adverse or damaging medical occurrence.
You
You're
can't.
not allowed to have those.
But like, leaves it broad and open. If you're having a dinner party, you're not causing a disturbance greater than what I would expect of your residential homes without short-term rental. I don't, that. That's the broad
So
discretion.
you have 20, you do a rental, you have 20 people over, it's your anniversary, that's an event. Is that an event?
I would say it is, yes.
Yeah, it is.
I know it is, but I'm a little less comfortable with that, to be honest with you. If there's no problems, what's the problem with that? And we only enforce by problems anyway.
As we talked about for the last couple of years on this too, and John remembers, I mean, the problem is not, someone has a wedding at their house, because, a lot of people live in Lake, they have a wedding once every 2-3 years. The problem is, if you live next door to that house and there's a wedding every single weekend or an anniversary party every single, Friday, Saturday night, that's the problem. It's a very different. That's why the approvals process for that, I mean, it's like talking about approving the lake house versus approving your neighbor's house, it's.
So we
And
have,
to that point, there are a couple of structures that I believe are being built specifically for that reason in the RLD.
Yeah.
So you gotta define what an event is. So as Mike just said, and I think appropriately, he first looks at the state, if they define an event. We, as a town, can define an event.
Yeah.
And I think we should
I think
put out a list of items that we consider to be an event. Because otherwise, just by having 48 people at a house, and if it's a social gathering, is it an event or isn't it?
Hey, John.
Yes.
I agree. I'm a lawyer. I love things listed out. Sarah's over there. She loves it. She loves the idea. The problem is, I can make you a really, really good list. And then Sarah and Kristen and Mike are going to add to that list. And we're going to get a great list. But what happens when somebody finds a loophole in that list?
Well, Chris, that
Yeah,
could be
that's
said
no
for anything that's ever written. People find loopholes. They're gonna do that. And the reality is that this whole ordinance is not written for the neighborly neighbor. This is written for the unneighborly neighbor. And if we make this list, at least we've got some bounds. And if we need to come back to the table and add to that list later on, it's no different than what we're doing now. We're readdressing some issues that we found with the ordinance.
I think one thing we to accept with short-term rentals is it's a continuous process that we're going to be amending this forever as things fall through. So we have to get to this point where, are we gonna create a list? Are we not gonna create a list? Are we gonna put the list in your guys' hands that is this an event? Is this not an event? If 48 people are at an anniversary dinner party and there's no problem, there's adequate parking space, do we care?
That's where I would caution, is that I would rarely, and I will. Again, Chris will kill me because I'm gonna give you my word that I would never write a violation for an event. I'm gonna write the violation for you've got 48 people, I see 30 cars parked all over the lawn. Now that's one violation per vehicle at $500 a pop. Brian, I know you got a short-term rental, I'm not gonna call you up, but if I sent you a letter saying there's a fine for whatever 20 times 500 is, because you had this, then put a stop to that real quick. Similar situation with the noise. There's the sheriff's office. Yes, we don't have a noise ordinance, but that's because there's a mechanism in there. We have those mechanisms. I think that event thing is just for one, if yes, we notice there is a constant, you're having a wedding there every single weekend, or two, to just notify those that are renting the short-term rental that, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that. Same thing that I'm sure you have in your listing saying you can't have a party, you can't have this, you can't have that. It's just, now we're reiterating.
So we have the ability to pull that permit. If there's a wedding and a short-term rental every week, every other week, or whatever, why wouldn't we just pull the permit?
Because without that, no events in there, we can't.
Well, I think we have to have no events in there.
Yep.
I mean, there's no question about that in my mind. I'm uncomfortable defining the events. Because I think, as John said, or whoever said, someone's gonna find a loophole eventually, and maybe that's okay. I mean, it's just my opinion, that we amend the law for that loophole.
Absolutely. All of our code is evergreen. I mean, that's why we have an ordinance committee.
Right.
To keep these things up to date.
Right.
So if somebody finds a loophole, next meeting, you add that into you go through the process and adapt it. I had a couple calls last week from people who live in the RLD complaining about not events, but just the noise from people, guests coming in,
We get them all.
trespassing on their property. One guy told me that his attorney told him to put up no trespassing sign, so he did. And he said, I still shag people off my property coming up from the lake. You know, he said, it's something. He said, you guys gotta do something, you gotta do something to prevent this, well, I mean, you're not, closing every loophole is probably not possible.
Right,
you know.
right.
However, my concern is not the weddings, but the noise that's created on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis. We have people that are living in those communities that are residents of the town. A lot of these short-term rentals, people don't live here. We had a letter last week from a lady on Westlake Road. The house next door to her is short-term rental. The people live in Florida. They're not here.
Mhm.
And, you know, to me, we have to protect our residents. We have to protect the taxpayers in our town. And
But don't we
they
have enough?
shouldn't have to live with that. They may have lived there for 20 years and all of a sudden the past 3 years, you got this going on every week during the summer. You shouldn't have to put up with that.
Let me piggyback on that. And that was one of the main reasons why we limited occupancy to 12. Because we said that we didn't want that situation where it was highly populated, creating those types of issues for the neighbors. And we said that if it was over 12, it would have to go to planning and they'd have to demonstrate that it wasn't going to be a nuisance to the neighbors.
You see, I don't think a number is the nuisance issue. It's the occupants. I mean, you could have two people that are playing loud music. It's not what, so I don't get why we're caught up in a number. If somebody's doing it right, do we care if there's 40 people there? I mean, that's the question.
It just,
If there's two people that are playing loud music and the owner's in Florida, I mean, do we have the teeth in our law to stop that?
The answer to that question is yes. If someone is there and they got 40 people at a lake house and they live in a 50-foot lot or a 100-foot lot, the answer is absolutely yes. Can you imagine the parking that is going to take place along Westlake Road or in the driveway or in the yard? And I would add to that, it is an unsafe condition. If somebody was to have a heart attack or that place caught on fire, how are the emergency vehicles going to get down that road and up to that property? So I think the answer to that question
Well,
is
they have to dodge,
absolutely
they have
yes.
to dodge all the landscape people that are always parked on Westlake Road, first of all, so
But
that would be the biggest. issue.
Absolutely, but if we're going and having 40 people,
The what?
they'd be in violation.
Yes.
only, Sarah, in the driveway. If we're having 48 people allowed to occupy a dwelling and it's a 50-foot lot, all those people are gonna be parking along the street.
At that point, you need to contact the sheriff's office.
And
They would-
it could happen anywhere in the town of Canandaigua.
But we don't have jurisdiction over County Route 16.
Absolutely,
So
I
that's,
agree, I understand, but that is in part why we had these numerous discussions, lengthy discussions about limiting the occupancy because of that issue. Now, I believe that you're absolutely right, Dave, in saying if there's orderly people there and it's respected, nobody's gonna complain.
Right,
But if this at least gives people the opportunity to say, hey, my neighbor's not being neighborly to me by having large numbers of people gathering at this house every weekend. I mean, we had a couple of people here, and I think there's still one sitting in the room that complained about a particular residence off the RLD that has a large number of cars parking up the driveway, in the front yard, all the time, every weekend. And I think that that's not a neighborly situation. And
I agree.
So
But
that-
do you already have the power to stop that?
Yes.
So why aren't we stopping that?
Well,
think
as
we
far,
are.
Because
I think there's three different conversations
Yeah.
going on. I really need to narrow it down to one. As far as the number of people, we have the parking, we have septic. Those two take care of that. If there's issues.
on a long-term basis.
No, if there's issues, file a complaint with the office. And this is the same thing that you guys need to tell people. Emails to the town board doesn't do anything. Complaints through cloud permit go to me directly. Complaints to the sheriff's office go to me directly. Don't call 911, call the non-emergency. They go to me directly. If you call the emergency line for the town of Canandaigua, they go to me. Those are the avenues that have to be taken. So if it's not getting done short term, then that's because we haven't gotten those. You give me an email, well, I'll get there eventually. That's how it goes. We have those avenues built in. And that's the biggest thing that I need everyone just to understand is that those avenues are built in. The occupancy, if you guys want to put a number on it, that's a town board ordinance committee decision. Staff will say, the state tells us what the maximum is that we can do. If you want to change that maximum, then you can. That's well within your right. This isn't permitted use on properties.
Do we open ourselves up to liability, Chris? If we put a number on, the state has a different number.
You open yourself up to challenge by the short-term rental owners. It hasn't been decided in New York State whether that challenge would prevail or not. The courts so far have indicated sort of a happy medium. You can regulate short-term rentals for public health, safety, and general welfare. But they are still, for the most part, not 100%, but single family residential uses in New York State right now. My guess is that's going to change, but I can't tell you when. You know, the goal with these short-term rental regulations is to make it so that the town can regulate a use that is somewhat like a hotel or a bed and breakfast. Say, you got to have parking, you got to have emergency access, you've got to have smoke detectors, you've got to have, you know, the regular safety features. You can't overload these things. If you're overly restrictive on regulating occupancy by a specific number, I think you're more susceptible to challenge. But you know, I think if you regulate under New York code, you're immune from challenge.
I think, Chris, I don't think and Dave, I don't think either. I don't think we're talking about just straight up regulating the maximum occupancy period. It's more, you know, when it goes to the higher level of review with the planning board, is it 12? Is it 16? Where is that number? I think is where
I think you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, I have to step off at 10:30. And I guess my recommendation is that you guys determine those numbers, your parking number, your special use permit number. Town staff and I can work up a definition of events, address the things Adeline mentioned, define overnight, you know, is the maximum daily use number the right number? You guys should have a decision on that. And then I would like, or I think we're close enough to get this on the next town board agenda, if possible. So that we can have we can have an enforceable, nice starting point.
Chris, before you leave, is there a reason why under miscellaneous this got switched down to 1 year
Yes.
rather than 3 years? Because we currently have people paying that have paid for 3 years. And we initially made that 3 years because we had town staff saying it would be less onerous on them to have to do this every year or every 3 years as opposed to every year. So my concern is how that would affect people who've already paid for 3, for one thing.
So to start out with, we'll figure out how it would affect people who've already paid for 3, in terms of applying their prepayment to their new permit. Town staff, since the town board has seen fit to upgrade their software capabilities, has decided that it won't be overburdensome anymore, and it will actually be more streamlined. And I think it makes sense, since it won't overburden staff, to do it on a 1-year basis because of what was brought up at our last ordinance committee meeting, that you know, if you sell it after year 1, you lose years 2 and 3's payment.
Chris, if we stayed with a 3-year and we changed the town law in that interim 3 years, which set of laws would they have to obey?
The new one, the new law.
So even if they had a 3-year permit?
Correct.
So they'd applied for a permit under one set of laws and then we changed the laws. That's not a problem?
Oh, it's gonna be a problem, but that's
So
the
what-
nature of changing laws.
Right, but one.
And I think our staff can, I mean, we figure out a way to apply previous application money or payments to the new payment. Sarah, does that make sense?
I mean, I guess, but what we did the last time the town board changed the short-term rental law was that everyone who already had a permit, and they were all expiring on December 31st of 2023, and starting January 1st, if they wanted to renew, they had to do it under the new law. We didn't change the permits that had already come in between January and May of 2023. So this would be doing things a little differently.
Then we add a line to this law saying what Sarah just said. That's
Yeah.
fine.
'Cause the biggest-
Essentially temporarily grandfathering.
biggest thing to remember is that by taking this out of zoning, no one has this permit. So,
Yeah, oh yeah, that is the difference with this law, is that it is being removed from chapter 220 and given its own chapter 201. 220 is where all the zoning lives in the code, which is where the law you have on the books right now is currently sitting, and the county has told us more than once, probably 2 or 3 times now, that it shouldn't be there. It
Should be separate.
It should be pulled out of
So the
the
people
zoning
who,
chapter and put into its own standalone chapter.
so the people, who, what happens if I got a
So that doesn't
permit
make
in
a-
May of 2023? What happens to my 3-year permit?
That's the question.
So we'll add a sentence to miscellaneous saying all valid permits as of the date of this new law will remain in effect throughout their term.
Right,
Through their term. So if I got my permit May of 2023, my
Right.
permit would work through May of 2026, correct?
Correct.
and we're only talking, as Sarah just said, 30 people.
Yeah.
20 or 30, I
Yeah.
think, I put it in the report.
Yeah,
You guys
it was
have,
45.
from May 15.
It's up a little
forward.
bit,
No,
yeah.
that included,
This year,
and,
okay.
no, it was what, that's more complicated.
Oh.
Sorry.
Brian, did you get a chance, did you have the copy of this before this meeting?
I did not, and I was gonna, you spared me some talking. The uniform code is the New York State definition of a bedroom, correct?
New York State
Occupancy.
does not have a definition of bedroom.
Occupancy then, correct? Bedroom size related to
Square
occupancy.
footage.
Yes.
Square footage.
Yes.
Cause the permit that I've been working with the town on, both were applied. You had the town and then you had the state definition,
Well,
and
so
then you were putting them together.
that's.
And I was gonna suggest you use one or the other, and since you've said the state is your guiding light, then I was gonna come and recommend that you pick one or the other, not both.
So we do have to pick both. That's town law that we have to go by, because the state does not define bedrooms. So the town has defined bedrooms within its code and its laws.
To make a long story short, I have a home right now that my wife and I renovated. We took a 6-bedroom, 1.5 bath, turned it into a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. We've rented it to 12 people successfully over the last 3 years without any incidents. Neighbors love it, guests love it, no issues whatsoever. With the new law, if you apply the town's code, 2 per bedroom, I'm allowed 10. If you apply the state's law,
Yeah.
I am allowed 10. If you put the 2 together, I'm allowed 7. Because of the size of the bedrooms.
What are this, I think we're going to a particular here. You can meet with me after. Cause like, are you talking about your 88 square foot bedrooms?
Well, also that I have one that's 220 that should allow 4. But it only allows 2 because of the
that's-
town.
That got.
I'm gonna step off now.
Thanks,
I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we can get this to a good place.
Per bedroom
Good,
is
so thanks, Chris.
Okay.
gone.
That's what I was here for.
It's what's currently on the books. But That's
Yes.
one of the things we're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in this newest iteration, should the town board go through, adopt it, get codified, then yes, that 2 per bedroom would be gone.
And then that's gonna address the large basements and lofts, sleeping lofts that a lot of these new homes have that are really large, that have like 2 queen beds
If
or 2
they're,
bunks.
if they're allowed by egress light.
Yes, yes, if they meet the
There's
code.
other criteria they need to meet in
Yes,
addition to.
yes.
square
Yeah,
footage.
yes,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that's a common scenario.
Yes.
You have a room with 2 bunk
Yeah,
beds.
yeah.
You know, that could sleep 4, but they were only allowed 2.
Yeah, so that got pulled out.
Thank you. That was my main reason for being here.
So, and then my last thing, premise, is just, we've sort of talked about it before, but the parking, I think last time we had the parking as 1 parking spot for 2 people, and now it's 1 parking spot for 3 people. I just want to make sure everybody was clear about that and why we made that change. Which I'm not sure why we made that change.
I think Chris, based on a conversation I had with him, just did it randomly. It was not that he was directed to do it in any way, he just did it randomly. And he said on my conversation with him that that's up to the town board, we can make it 2, we can make it 3, whatever.
I just wanted to bring it up and have.
Communities have, like, I can't remember all the ones I've looked at. I've looked at a bunch of different communities, short-term rental laws. Like, I think this one was Gorham, for example. Their parking limits, top end limits was, per 4 people, you had to have at least 1 parking space.
For short-term rentals or just general?
Short-term.
For short-term rentals.
And so it changes, it varies from law to law. I don't know.
What's
what
the
right
negative
answer is.
between 2 and 4?
I mean, it's
I-
just, there has to be.
Sounds like
parking.
fewer cars to me, right?
And I guess you also think, I mean, you probably can answer this question better, is like the reality of what people use to get to the rental. Is it a whole family of 4 people or 5 people showing up in 1 car? Or is it a group of friends meeting on the weekend and they each have a car and there's only 1 person in it, you know, so. I mean,
Another way to
there's a
limit
bunch of different
occupancy.
things that are gonna limit the lot itself. Does the way the site was developed provide for that kind of parking? You know, I mean, does it even have enough hard surfaces to park that many cars? And you can use this law for parking as a way to limit too. So I mean, there's a lot of different things to consider when you decide the parking to people or parking to bedroom ratio.
Yes, yeah.
I don't
So-
know how to
so your-
answer
your-
that, but
Rental of 12, how many cars typically show up?
4,
That seems reasonable.
you know, and
Yeah.
they could park 20,
Yeah,
but
but I mean, I mean, that's a real life example of it's 3, maybe 3 per car.
and then
the,
with that 3 people of maximum occupancy. Although it doesn't say that in parking, it just says for 3 occupants. I mean, it'd be 4 spots, but.
usually it's on-site parking,
Right.
and when they begin to park on the streets, that's where I get, and I've been doing this 33 years. And there's always that bad scenario. Usually it's with a private owner, but I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you go out and deal with a problem renter, I've done it in my pajamas, you know, they get right into line. I mean, I've never had any problem pulling people back into line. So if you and I start doing that, the concerns that these 2 have, I don't think we'll be around anymore.
And just to be clear, it's not on-road parking, it's.
Off-site, yeah.
Off-road. No, no, no site.
Yeah, that's what I meant,
So
yeah.
they have to provide on the site where the
Yes.
house is, not on the road,
Yes,
you know, 1
4
spot
car, right,
every 3
right.
people. And I
So
also
you
think
have
we should.
parking in a driveway, if the driveway is 100 feet long for the house. There's adequate parking for 4 or 5 cars.
Sure,
You look at the driveway, you're not looking at
non,
spots pulled off the driveway that are paved or demarked somehow for parking. It's,
Well, you'd still have to,
how do you look at it?
so you'd still have to require access.
They can't block the
You
driveway.
can't block.
Well,
But
okay,
I'm not sure it says that in this.
You don't need it to.
Okay.
By chapter 92 of our code, everything I do has to follow New York State Uniform Code, i.e. fire code says.
access to the facility.
Access
right,
had
yeah.
to be provided no
Yeah.
matter what.
regarding parking and events.
Hmm.
You said people should send the complaints to you.
Yep.
So that you can act on them.
On Cloud,
Saturday afternoon,
That'll change, but.
somebody notices
Yeah.
something like that, they send you an email.
No,
What happens then?
so they need to send me through cloud permit, because that's the way the code is written,
They have to send you a,
through cloud permit.
oh, okay. What?
And then it would come to me. If it was deemed to be of importance that it be resolved now. And it was deemed to be a matter of which was in my jurisdiction. then yes, I would respond out and it happens.
That's my question is that how much of this occurs after the fact? You can't personally see it because it's dispersed, but it was an issue. How, you know, and that,
Which
it's a,
with Cloud Permit, with this new software that you guys approved on
Last meeting,
Monday,
yeah.
last Monday, that's all taken care of. Cloud Permit, the reason why we have to use that is not only to the code, but because you upload videos, you upload pictures. with
how
the
many of
software.
our residents in the town are aware that cloud permit exists?
Terry, I was wondering if we should do something on the newsletter. I mean, if we do something, then you're gonna get complaints.
Yeah.
That's the negative, so.
So there's only a fraction of people that get our newsletters. So.
But
I mean,
if it's, I mean,
how do people
So-
know how to complain, other than like calling the sheriff?
If you go to our website, if,
You can only tell people so.
Right.
They need to go look for it.
right, right.
so I just updated the whole website for our site. If you go to the website, you scroll all the way down, it's FAQs, it's building permits, occupancy, this, and this, and this, all the way down to the bottom. It lists, how do I file a complaint with like a paragraph verbatim of what I'm.
How to, right.
With the link right underneath that says, click this link and go.
So if we as town board members are receiving complaints, I would refer them to Cloud Permit, and that resolves it.
So there are a lot of people, Dave, that aren't that familiar with using a computer
No,
to
I-
make these
And
things.
listen, I
You know,
just,
it's-
as Sarah can attest to, I've had my struggles with Cloud Permit, but it's there and you can figure it out. I mean, it's not.
And
I
it'd
was
be-
just saying the new Granica software.
It's gonna be easier.
To supersede.
Right.
The,
Only for short-term.
For short-term rentals,
Only.
yeah.
It will have a complaint system. And again, we can communicate through all of the avenues we have available to us as a town, the newspaper, the Facebook page, the newsletter, word of mouth.
At the end of the day, that's all we can do.
That's all.
Right.
It's-
And eventually,
Well-
honestly, if somebody calls up your office and complains, you'll get to that eventually, but it's not an immediate thing. So
If-
they are gonna be answered.
So, but how much of that not being, that's one of my points, Dave, is. You need to be able to see this stuff. You can't take somebody
Right.
else's word for it. So if it's the next day, then whatever the issue is, it's probably gone.
It's gone, right?
Well, how do you deal with that?
So that's why we have Cloud Permit where you can attach pictures and attach videos. Now, I'm not saying if someone emails me, I'm gonna ignore it. No, it's gonna be taken care of in the same manner. It's just, I'm gonna say, hey, by the way, while I take care of this, this is the official route, go do that.
And
I can't do much more than that.
Well,
So-
And we're not asking you to do much more than that. I mean, we have
I know.
to, we have to operate
Yeah,
the systems that we have.
And that's
right?
the tough part. I mean, aside from, well, creating the town of Canandaigua Police Department and having someone out on the road 24/7, you're never gonna meet that. If you wanna file a complaint, take pictures, take videos, take audio files, send them to me.
that's what most of them do anyway.
Yeah, it's,
So if we can bring this back to the law that's in front of us in a straw poll, how do people feel about as it's written with a couple of modifications?
Depends what the modifications are though, Dave.
Well, what are, I
Like,
mean,
I personally, for me personally, the whole maximum occupancy to obtain a special use permit, I would rather have that back to 12 as opposed to 16.
And I have a bunch of comments on this that I'd like to
Yeah.
bring up
Go.
also.
go ahead.
No?
Yep.
Okay, under item
Yeah.
number 201-5, application for short-term permit. Item number C. It says sketch plan map, sketch plan / map. And I say which? Sketch plan or map?
everybody know what the sketch plan is?
Tell me what a sketch plan / map is. I don't know.
either
that
or.
is.
If you wanna take a Google
That's
map
okay. So if you want to
picture-
say sketch plan or map,
Or you want the word
Sketch,
or?
comma. sketch, plan or map. That
Well,
would satisfy.
It would just be a sketch plan one.
Yeah.
Sketch
plan,
that's-
Sketch,
yeah.
comma.
Okay.
plan.
You're saying that it kind of insinuates you want to do both of those.
Sketch
So,
plan or sketch. map.
sketch plan map showing. So you're,
Sketch plan or map.
the way it's written now, you're saying that it says you should submit both.
I'm saying it's it's unclear.
Okay, or
You
Yep.
wanna-
And word.
That's no problem.
Item number E. Evidence of property liability insurance indicating the property is insured and rated. What does that mean?
That's why we send it to the insurance broker, because none of us are insurance experts. It's their language.
That's what he
It's
used.
Insurance.
Chris, you-
language.
Well, there you go, right,
And just so you guys know, that's what we do now.
Yeah.
We have been doing it since I moved to the department and we started doing short-term rentals, is that we don't review the insurance. We
Send it right
send it to Chris Hugler, who's the town's broker, and we have him review it. He sends it back to us and says, yes, this has what it's supposed to, or no, this one doesn't. Here's what you can tell them. So we
Which
don't do it internally.
I've talked to him about that, and he said that's working fine, because he can find what he's looking for like that, instead of you guys spending half an hour trying to figure out where that is.
Well, and
So,
we aren't
you're not
insurance
sure.
providers, we're not insurance brokers, we don't want to be, we don't, that's, I don't think that's.
So that is
appropriate for us
working.
to be reviewing.
It's working for him, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Under 201-7. Item number N. That speaks to the number of guests.
I think you've got different item numbers in this, by the way. So
Okay.
what does it say at the beginning of it?
No events.
No events, yeah.
No events shall be allowed at short-term rentals. I think that we need to define events.
It sounds like Chris Nadler said he'll try and help us come up with something to start with.
Okay, and I would question whether everyone is comfortable, and it should say number of guests, not amount of guests.
Mhm.
And I think that there should be some discussion whether 48 people in a single dwelling is,
That, well, you've got a good point on that one, because that might, because you're reading that differently than I read that, which makes me feel like we need to make that more clear. So it says, guests are permitted provided that the number of guests does not exceed twice the amount of the maximum occupancy. So does that mean if you've got 16, that twice amount is 32?
Yes.
Or you were reading it as 16 means an additional 32?
that's
Is
right.
that how you were reading it?
That's how I read it.
That's what it says.
I believe it says that 48 people would be allowed to stay in a single dwelling.
So I think we need
Twice
to
the
clarify
amount
that.
means 2 times.
That's right. Number of guests is twice the
16
amount.
times 2.
Total.
The number of guests,
Total would be twice.
the number
Say
of
guests
guests
as
is
opposed to-
twice the amount.
That's what it says.
So what's the intent then? That's read the back up.
The intent
What
is
do you want?
16 to 32, not 16 to 48. I think
That's right.
this would be-
The number of guests does not exceed the
What's a
number
guest?
of, or whatever the maximum occupancy.
People
is.
staying at the short-term rental or people coming during the day?
So what if we just changed it to, instead of maximum occupancy, we just say overnight occupancy, and that's really what we're permitting, and then we say the maximum occupancy of the house cannot exceed that of 1.5, 2 times.
No, I think it's just the word guest that's the problem, because the way it, if you say, I get what you're saying, John, because you're saying twice the amount of the maximum occupancy of guests.
Yes,
So you can have, if you've got a 16 maximum occupancy, you've got 32 guests.
Yes.
You're calling that twice.
That's what it says.
As opposed to need, and I think the intent of what you've written here is that the amount of people allowed there per day, daytime. So I think it should say something that
twice
says
the
something like
allowable.
daytime occupancy can be no more than twice the amount, as opposed to guests can be no more. than twice
Well,
the amount.
technically, they're all guests.
Well,
what I was
that's,
thinking.
That's the way I read this.
That's
you
why I
know,
said we
non-paying
have to kind of
Yeah.
define the two.
we need some words.
Some
non-paying guests, maybe that's it.
It's not, it's a
Not
good
clear.
point, it's not clear, so.
and then I would add to that, what about the parking? For the guests?
Isn't that defined already?
No,
That's for the overnight
that's
guests.
for the
No,
overnight guests.
Parking doesn't differentiate between overnight.
It just says
It
parking,
is.
right, right.
Parking is what it is.
Still can't park on the grass, still can't park, it still has to be parking in
Okay,
approved places.
let me keep going. Number P on my list, under the same, it's the second item past the one we were just talking about. Egress doors shall be operational, accessible. What does that mean?
That's,
They can't be
Accessible,
blocked with
Yeah.
whatever.
that's,
handicap accessible?
That's a good point.
that's just verbatim.
And,
what I
and,
take
and
from it.
there are other places in this code as written, that talk about accessibility. And I want to make sure we talk about accessibility. These residences now are becoming commercial properties, in my opinion. And commercial properties have an obligation to make their places accessible to people that have mobility challenges. And to me, that's huge and it's very important. 80% of us are gonna have mobility issues by the time we pass on this life. And that's a fact.
Brian, what would that do to, short-term rentals that you own or
Well,
manage?
we disclose it. Some do, some
Some
don't.
don't, right?
Um. It'd be very difficult to comply with ADA laws, particularly on some of the older
A lot of
homes.
things are difficult.
Yeah.
But if they're gonna become a commercial facility. There was an ADA compliance code issued by George Bush back in the 90s. I think if places want to be commercially,
ADA started in 1986.
I can tell you though, you're never gonna get a short-term rental that's ADA.
that's not my
So,
issue.
Well, I understand, but if,
As a short-term renter, the
I
owner's issue.
I
He can
understand
provide
that.
ramps, he can provide temporary ramps, he can do whatever he wants to do. But in my opinion, if he's becoming a commercial property or anyone's becoming a commercial property, it should be accessible. 80%.
So
If the guests come or other people come and want to use that facility, how are they gonna do it if it's not accessible?
So if you take that and say, I'm gonna rent for the solar eclipse for that week, is that a commercial property that needs to be ADA compliant?
They're renting it for pay,
Yes,
I believe it's commercial property.
I don't, I disagree with you on that. I mean, I think as
You
Brian
claim
pointed
it on
out,
your income taxes. No, it's not
as
commercial.
Brian pointed out, some are accessible, some are not accessible, and then I think that's incumbent on, I mean. I would hate to see beautiful old farmhouses that are rented out for 2 weeks of the year with ramps in the front yard. I mean, from
You
an
put ramps in their
accessibility
garage and can bring them out when they need them, can put them in the basement, bring them out when they need them.
I can tell you. They are not
I
required.
could tell you the challenges about accessibility all day long.
I
if you want me to.
full-heartedly
Like, I
agree,
mean,
I full-heartedly agree, but from my side. A short-term rental is still what's called an R3 occupancy. An R3 occupancy does not meet the applicable definition to require ADA.
New York State code. That's
Yes,
New York State code.
whether it is a commercial property, whatever, New York State still defines a short-term rental as an R3, single-family dwelling. Until that definition changes,
Single-family dwelling, but they're not single-family dwellings. We're just saying that we're gonna
I-
occupy it with 12 people or 16 people.
it's still a single-family dwelling. By state law, state code.
I'm not gonna get hung up on it.
I know.
I'm bringing it up as an issue. I think it's an important
I
issue
think
that
it's
needs to
a-
be considered.
think it's a good issue.
Is there a way to indicate somewhere in here, to please consider the needs of residents with disabilities? Is there a way to encourage, building a first floor bedroom, for example? Or, I mean, is there a way to put anything in here that's encouraging in a direction as opposed to
Well,
requiring it necessarily?
I mean, if you look at Brian, you have facilities that he advertises as accessible,
It
right?
can be like parking.
Right.
You can designate homes for ADA compliance, which we do.
Yeah.
Somebody calls up and they do, and their mobility issues
Those more market.
Yeah, you're gonna have a premium.
in town, yeah.
Everyone rather
Any idea, Brian, of what the split is between? ADA accessibility versus.
We don't track that. We probably will end up doing that. Because
I just.
John is right, it will become a bigger issue.
The
But,
market will drive that.
but Mike is right too. These are residential homes still. I'm governed by the Department of State as a realtor. The state has to declare these commercial
Mhm.
before I think it can be perceived as commercial here. That's my opinion. But I understand what John is saying. It's a valid point.
Yes. John, do you have other?
Yes, the next one is R. And my list, same, the next one, which talks about parking. I think that, the committee needs to decide whether it's gonna be 2 occupants or 3 occupants per parking space.
And
And
also,
consider whether that is creating a neighbor-friendly environment or an unneighborly friendly environment. Like having more parking.
Yeah.
Or less cars or more cars or encouraging more people to stay there and not stay there.
can I add to your question while we're on it?
Please,
And Kim, since you're in the room too, it just says durable surfaces such as driveways. I feel like we should toss in something there about permeable pavements or, I don't, particularly since a lot of these are close to the lake, I don't want to encourage people to make more blacktop driveway surfaces next to their homes.
That's
So-
limited by site development.
But yeah, by the lot coverage and such too.
And those surfaces would be considered durable. I think what we're trying to get is grass, right? You're trying to get,
Well, yeah, we already have that.
right,
If there's already an off-street parking regulation, that this is just mirrored.
Okay.
If they wanna extend their driveway for their short-term rental, they'd have to get a permit.
right.
We have those. So,
But my point is I don't want to encourage more paving, particularly to the lake than is necessary, so.
But in order to do that, they'd have to get a permit
Yeah.
to do that, which
yeah,
could
and
be acted on by the planning board, right?
planning board, zoning board
Right.
wouldn't
Yeah.
allow a lot coverage variance.
Right.
Planning board
Yeah.
would suggest
Right.
permeable pavement versus
Sure, you can
this.
say the zoning board wouldn't allow a lot.
Exactly.
Sorry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's all.
But like, there's those avenues for that, so.
The parking, we're largely talking about the RLD area.
Mhm.
The parking is, unless somebody has some acreage, and most people don't, but you're gonna be parked on Westlake Road, the County Road 16. That's the way it is, so I mean, then,
And for people who live
Yeah,
there, and
it's not
it's their
within our
own home,
purview.
they're gonna be able to do that, but for people renting, they're not gonna be able to do that.
so that becomes a, call the sheriff.
Yeah.
I mean. you
I can't do anything with County Road 16. No, so if they're blocking County Road 16, then it's a sheriff's office issue.
Yeah, it doesn't say they can't park,
So-
it just means they have to provide
Right,
parking.
per their number of people that they have
Override.
available in their house, right? So,
But if they are not providing that parking, then you can do something about that.
but they would have to get a permit, correct? They would have to have so many parking spots for the number of people in the
That's what I
house.
mean,
Right,
like if
you can't say on the road parking,
you
right?
had room to
Correct?
park 3 cars, but do one.
No,
Oh, it
but I
says
also
in the
can't,
driveway here.
but I can't specify not on the road.
Right. But if you have a house that is for 6 and we say 3 per car, then you have to have that number of parking spots at your
Yeah.
short-term rental.
Yes,
Correct. So if they park out on the road, I mean, it's like the landscapers and the German Brothers boat
out of our,
owners,
yeah,
right?
it's out of our jurisdiction.
Right.
Can I ask, I feel like this parking one might need a little clarification based on what you guys were saying. It says a minimum of 1 off-road parking space. So off-road as in on-site. For each 3 occupants of the property. Is that based on the maximum occupancy as defined by the zoning inspector?
I feel yes to
So
that.
if they have,
Overnight.
if they're getting a permit for, let's use your 12 people, for example. Then I feel like this parking paragraph should be clarified that in that specific case, the maximum occupancy, let's say it's 12 for the house we're talking about. Then they have to show that they have 4 off-road parking spaces.
I agree.
I don't think this paragraph says that right. It just says for each occupant, 3 occupants. I think it's
And we need to
wide
define,
that that's what we mean, but
we need to
based on
define,
the maximum
So-
occupancy decided
Hey,
above or whatever. we
Just,
said.
just what you said, based on the maximum occupancy, whether it's 2 or 3 per car, we put that in that way.
maximum overnight occupancy.
Right, right.
So I think, because we haven't defined, occupancy guests, whatever, there's those, I think like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we're next.
maximum overnight occupancy.
But can you put it in, for example, in parentheses? With an occupancy, overnight occupancy of 12, this would
4
mean
spots.
4.
That's a good, that's a good,
Yeah,
Can't
we
say
should
that.
definitely do
right.
that.
Then people can figure the math out from there,
Yeah.
or more or less, hopefully.
Which we can do that on the application.
Yeah.
Without putting it.
I mean, I think what we as the town board we lose sight of that these guys do go through a lot of this already, that a lot of this is already teased out for what our intent is. We're just trying to get the intent right.
So do we like the three people per 1 spot? Do we like that?
I
We
can
haven't
live with that,
discussed
yeah.
John, do you like that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm more concerned about the number of occupants in general.
Okay.
Better than the per bedroom, the old ordinance, so I
Yeah,
think,
that's
yeah,
what I was thinking is right now, it's.
per
based
bedroom,
on bedrooms.
occupants is more
Occupants,
realistic.
yeah.
Okay,
And three's fine.
Number. I got it under S and it's number 6. I noticed that occupants are not permitted to disturb neighbors.
Are you still under, section 2017?
Yes,
operating. requirements.
K number 3.
Okay. So what was your question, Don? I'm sorry.
it's kind of broad and maybe it's done that way on purpose and maybe we let the neighbor determine what it means to disturb them. That's my only comment about that. The 3 bullets down is number 9 on my sheet. It says contact numbers for emergency services as provided by the town of Canandaigua and property's 24-hour local contact. So what this says is that the town of Canandaigua is going to provide emergency telephone numbers to every short-term rental. Is that what you want to do?
Is that what we're doing currently?
Yeah, it's printed on the permit.
Yeah, it's printed on the permit, and this is just for that notice that's gonna hang there. The reason why is because the Granicus software, they have that complaint number. So now if the renter wanted to say, hey, which this happened a lot, this house isn't safe, this isn't right with this house and I'm renting it, they can file a complaint as well.
Should we provide that Granicus number to the immediate neighbors of short-term rentals? So they have someone to call instead of you.
We can, yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
most of what we're talking about here is because we're trying to limit the disturbance of neighbors and make sure that it's a safe environment for the renters. So if there's a way to let the neighbors, at least immediate neighbors, know if there are issues, here's a number to call. You can call it down, you can call it sheriff, but here's another number. And if Granicus is as good as they say they are, and they're going to collect all this information, that would be a good resource to let you know exactly what.
Yeah, we can push it out in the newsletters and on the website.
I'll just add, we do that already. Anytime we
Yeah.
take on, we let the neighbors know. And I have someone 24 hours a day to pick up the phone if there's an issue. That keeps you guys out of it.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
But see, you're not.
You're not the problem. That's the problem is you're not the problem.
I wasn't gonna say this, but you know, the town of Penn as an example is now adopting short-term rental laws. And they have in there a requirement that there be a person within 30, I think it's 30 miles that's available to go to the site. That's a key because very few renters are misbehaving. You know, you stop the bad renters before coming. You don't deal with them when they're there. And having someone that the neighbors can call to go to the site if needed, and it's very rare, but maybe once, twice a summer with 6,000 reservations, or one of my staff will get called out. That's an important part of the process to address some of those concerns I'm hearing about.
That's not a bad point.
We
That,
talked about that before.
is that something that we should do in this law?
A couple, I don't remember which ordinance meeting it was, but yeah, we did talk about that and how do we decide, do they have to give the address of where they live, or is it like the office address in cases where it's a company like yours? And then, we can.
But it
It's
takes,
a little more work on the front end, issuing a permit.
but it takes that, I live in Florida renting a house that's a problem away from that you have to have somebody that's accountable within a driving distance.
Oh,
Yeah.
Is that a problem for you guys?
They
That,
have to have a local contact already.
Yeah.
We don't
So,
define
but
local.
what's local, right?
And we
don't
brought
put
that up
distance.
before and we were
No,
like,
we don't right now.
do we do it by county? Do we?
So we don't
by
do that,
distance? Do we
right.
do it by, whatever it means.
Well, I think we just got the answer.
They did 30
It,
minutes.
it lessens your responsibility because you can say, did you call the manager or did you call the contact person?
Wouldn't
Well, it
require
wouldn't-
that. I mean,
Yeah.
But you
still-
could.
If it came to you guys would act on it
Yeah, I
regardless,
can't.
right?
If they
Yeah.
submit a complaint, it doesn't matter whether they contacted the management company or not, you know.
You guys might contact, say, I'm going out, and you might, do you ever contact the management
Yeah.
company? Problem, so we're kind of doing that, but I like it having someone that's accountable within draw a circle.
Well, it's to the advantage of the owner of the short-term rental, because the risk is if they violate,
Right,
you
They
get a lot
lose
of
their
complaints, you're
Right.
gonna lose permit.
Right. so was that something we add in?
I mean, potentially,
Figure
the
out how to
problem,
do it.
yeah, the problem before became, you know, is it Ontario County and neighboring counties? Is it 30 miles? Is it in town, Canandaigua, you know, whatever it may be, that was.
Say
the
within
problem.
30 minutes,
Yeah.
something like that.
I can send you some language.
That would be great. I mean, 'cause I think that's maybe something we have, would be worth at least looking at.
Can I send it to Sarah? 'Cause I
Sure.
have her in. Yeah.
Item number J, only a couple below that, let me see, 4 or 5 bullets below that. All short-term rentals must be and remain fully insured as short-term rentals. I think that's redundant. We already talked about insurance above.
He's on J, it should be L.
That's where it gets goofy right there.
It is kind of redundant, but remember, these are falling under the requirement that you post signage, and this is what the signage has to include. The law says they have to have insurance when they apply under 201(5) application for a short-term rental. It does say that they need to have insurance under there. This is additional requirements that are,
They must maintain that
different.
insurance.
this one, we're still talking about the property must conspicuously post the following signage, blah, blah, blah. We're still
No,
under
this is
that, aren't
it's
we?
not. This
Where,
now
this
if
is
you
just the
want- it's
operating
here.
requirements.
Oh, am I missing a section?
It's on what will be L. It's here, it's outside of K. It's the first thing outside of K.
What section is it? 200?
This is,
200 and.
Sub-
One,
uh,
the
201
seven.
Stop it.
Right,
117.
So 217. So it's under what is
So yes, you
currently
have to
J.
comply with this, and then the other section was
It's outside.
under the application.
This one's outside of the signs.
Is there a way to remove that without affecting?
Do you want that to be in the sign? Is that supposed to be in the? sign?
Sorry, I just think I was looking at the wrong section. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think that's not signage, is it?
Do they need to have
Yeah.
signage indicating that insurance?
No, that
So then
operating.
that's, we could
requirement-
probably just kill that off then.
No, I thought it was underneath the signage, but you
Yeah,
guys said it's not.
It's
It's
underneath the
not, it's
operating.
the first thing
requirement,
after.
Saying that, so the first section, like Sarah was saying, is the application. They have to provide us proof. That second section is you must maintain this
Yeah.
throughout the life of the
It
permit.
actually makes sense to me that you could apply for the permit and have insurance and then let the insurance lapse and still be
Yeah.
comply with what we're requiring.
It's so similarly like building permits. They used to send theirs every single January. The department had a binder. As soon as I got here, I stopped that for the same reason. Well, I don't know if you just canceled your insurance after you sent that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
this way, this is just saying you.
Right.
Main function.
Yep.
So is it okay that this stays as an item under operating requirements and under application requirements?
So
Is it necessary that it's there and the redundancy is just?
I'm not sure it's
Side effect.
redundant. I think it's in emphasizing that you need to continue that insurance. That's the way I read it.
well, that's what it also says here. It says,
does.
it says that it will remain insured as an STR throughout the term of the STR permit. So E back on the second page under 201-5, E already says that it will remain insured. And then this says it
So we
must
could-
be and remain.
We could strike that down.
Yeah, we can strike it, I think.
I would check with Chris first, just because if I'm gonna write a violation because your insurance lapsed, I don't think I can write it underneath the application. Because that would tell a judge that you just falsified the application.
Okay.
Saves- You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not
Let's leave-
overthinking it, but.
Yeah, let's leave it then. Yeah, let's leave it then for enforcement.
And I was gonna say, I think just looking at the way this is written, you can tell it's a concern. It's
Mhm.
written.
Yeah.
Twice.
It's written again.
Right.
And it goes.
Kinda like
off
the
where
event
it's
one.
written, made sure that it was really solid.
Makes sense.
It's just, it lives under two different parts of the law, the application and then when you're actually operating.
Mhm.
It's redundant, but I think it's okay. I think it's by design.
Okay, under. I'm just pausing because my numbers are different than yours. we already talked under 201.7 about not permitted to disturb neighbors, right?
Yeah. we did that.
And then under what I have is P, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 below the one we just talked about. It says no short-term rental shall cause a disturbance or nuisance to the neighbors.
So that's in here as P.
It's right about 201-8.
Yeah, right about 201-8.
And I don't think we should add as greater than what would have been caused by similar property not used for short-term rental. I just think we should just say shouldn't be a disturbance or nuisance to the neighbors, period.
Yeah.
So that P has to stay there because the other section previously was just talking about the sign.
I'm fine with that.
It's
It's staying, but I just think it,
Other.
I don't think you ought to say greater than what would be caused by similar property, because to Dave's
It's
point
enough
that he
that
said
there's-
before, a neighbor, a property owner could play loud music and own the property and be a disturbance. So just,
Was that an Adler
That
thing? Where
was
did
a-
that come from?
That was an Adler thing because we had gotten numerous people into this room at the last one meeting and said, you're holding us to a higher standard. This
Mhm.
isn't correct. When I can't play loud music because we don't have a noise ordinance, but so-and-so down the street can. And they own that property. And that's why that was put in.
I think putting this, if it's greater than would be caused, means you are treating them differently.
it becomes arbitrary at that point.
How do you measure?
That's what Murphy's entire, that's why he gets paid the
Yeah.
difference. He is the disturbance measurer.
That's, and that was put in by Chris.
Agree or don't agree with that?
I agree with it.
To keep it different.
To keep it different, because I do have to side with the renters in this case of I'm having a short-term rental, or I'm renting a short-term rental. If I want to play music out of a boombox, I can't do that. But
Fine, not short-term rental
John
next
Doe
door.
next
Right.
door, who just owns property, he can, because we don't have a noise ordinance. So we'd be holding them to a higher standard. This way, we're saying, no, everyone's the same. Just, we obviously know that this is too.
Going to the couple below that, let me just see, now under 201-8 miscellaneous, it would be the 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth item. What's the number, 12 or 16?
14.
I vote 12. What do you vote, Terry? What do you vote?
16.
What do you vote, John?
I'm only pausing and hesitating because I originally was at 16. We, as a committee, determined it was going to be 12. And whatever number is in here gets reflected in how many guests they can have.
Right.
And that concerns me. So I'm tending now more to go with the lower number because I'm concerned about how many people could be in a dwelling. And
This one doesn't dictate how many people can be there. It dictates.
I understand,
whether or
I
not
understand,
when it
but,
goes.
but the previous one says we can have.
Yeah.
2 times the number, so that's what concerns me. So I guess my vote is 12.
But that's not on
If-
this section.
Wait,
That
well-
doesn't change. This only says applications where the maximum occupancy is over a certain number, whatever number that you choose it to be, those will be reviewed by the planning board. This sentence, this paragraph does not dictate how many people can be there. It
So
just-
who's gonna go to the
It,
planning board?
it becomes part of the, I understand that.
It does not.
I understand
define-
I understand
Just so we know that it won't
I understand
impact that other item we were talking about. with-
If it goes to the special, if it goes to a special
Special use
use
permit.
permit, I understand that completely, but I,
That
my
would
vote
be
is
a
12.
consideration of planning. board.
Okay, so
I just
Yeah.
want you guys to understand what this piece means.
Yeah.
It doesn't
So-
mean how many, it doesn't
total, it just
change the
Right.
number of
Yep.
guests
Right.
for the events. It's
Right.
nothing to do with that.
So Sarah, do we know, and I don't want to put you on the spot, do you know how many of those permits currently are 16? Or how many
About
permits have gone to
12.
the planning board?
No.
none yet.
We haven't
None
had that.
We had conversation
Because
about
the
this.
law on the books right now doesn't.
Yeah,
say that
you're
any
right, you're right, you're right. I forget.
We're the appeal process. no.
We
Yeah,
had
yeah, I got that.
conversation about this a lot
Mhm.
in previous meetings. And I think that we determined that there was probably a half a dozen
That are accept,
that are
exceed that.
exceed this number.
I would say that's a greater number.
Don't know.
We were doing that off the 2-person per bedroom count.
Mhm.
Now we'd be going off of the square footage. I think it'd be
That's good point,
substantially higher.
good point.
Yeah.
So we want to do that, knowing that we're gonna throw a number of things at the planning board.
Well, that,
And-
I mean, if
and-
we're changing it so that so many more can be in there, that makes me, you know, even more concerned about the higher number. Just because of the potential, I mean, the potential for there being a higher number and creating a higher nuisance possibility on the.
So,
neighboring property.
What criteria would the planning board use to deny a 16 if it was 12?
Parking.
Parking,
And
So-
parking site plan, yeah, safety issues.
so if all those things went through. That it all stops at the application process. If there's not enough parking for 16, it goes, so. I feel like we're gonna throw a lot at the planning board that doesn't need to be, that my opinion.
Would it be?
Because if we're gonna throw it at the planning board and they're gonna approve it, why don't we just have it in the law that way anyway?
Well, to that point, Dave. I guess we said this is a living
Oh, yeah.
document that is gonna need to be modified. As you said, into perpetuity, so. Why not start with a lower number and work our way up if that becomes a nuisance for the planning board?
That my only concern is the planning board. That are we gonna throw, I mean, we're at 40, we think there's somewhere around 250, right? Short-term rentals out there, 230.
No,
Under 200.
the companies that gave us demos, the software companies, they came up with it was like around 150.
So we're at 40, we got 150 more to go, or we've got 110 more to go, or something like that.
They're under permitted. I mean, there's a lot of people doing it who don't have permits.
Brian, how many of yours are in excess of 12? Roughly,
It
just
depends on the town.
Canada, will be,
Well, the laws changed, so a lot of them are down under, way down. So it's gonna affect their revenues. But I'd say 20%
20%.
or more than, maybe 25, 30. But it's not the bulk of them.
If you were in our position, would you say 12 or 16?
My opinion is that it's property specific. I have properties that can handle 100. Because they're,
But they would have to go in front of the.
yeah,
So
so
what
it's
I'm
not,
saying
it's
is-
not the number, it's the quality of the renters. It's the contracts, it's the upfront work that's done.
Right,
It's having the mechanisms on site. So the actual number of occupants isn't the key thing that determines the success of the renter.
That's the point of the
but
planning board.
But for us, we have to come up with a number that says we're gonna throw, after this number, we're gonna throw it at the planning board. Would you say 12 or 16?
I would say 16.
But Dave, you've got,
But if I could just add one thing. If there are complaints against the property, can you deny a permit based on that? Or- No, you can't.
so it's kind of a moot point at this point, because you've got, the town board's gonna be the one that's eventually.
Right, I'm alone on
We've
this,
got
so.
3 of us at 16 right now.
I got it.
So we should probably recommend it at 16. We can have the discussion again on the town board. See
3
where
to
other
12, you're
town-
saying,
I'm sorry,
Amy,
3 of us at 12.
Right,
And we should probably bring it to the town board at 12, have another discussion there again, see if any of us sway in a different direction. But with the majority of the ordinance
So,
at 12, we should
agreed.
send it to
So
12.
we'll leave it at 16 for the town board discussion when this comes up in front of
We
us,
should
putting
leave
it
it
at 12.
Okay. So, because that's what the majority of the ordinance committee.
All right, so let's
do.
change that to 12 then. Let's change it. I do too,
I know it's gonna be sending a lot your way. and we
Yep,
just
so
got
I would say
16
16.
applications for you last
Be a
week.
very long PRC.
Well, and I look at this almost like a major home occupation. And that's how we look at it in terms of the SUP.
I think that's, yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know.
What it is.
Yeah,
That's
that's really what it
pretty-
is. So you're looking at the same
commercial.
parameters. I mean, if the guy's gotta widen his driveway to comply with the off-road driveway, then maybe that'll put him into an impervious,
Right,
surface issue, and his percentage is higher than it should be.
and he can't.
Then he can't, or he's gotta go to ZBA and get it
Yeah.
done.
Well, Sarah, at this meeting, you need to speak up. 16 versus 12.
For me, it's like kind of, I'm removing the emotion and what I'm worried about, and as far as like, you know, complaints or whether or not they're good rentals. And I'm just thinking about the paperwork.
Right.
And the process.
Right, that's what I'm thinking of too. It's like,
Just for that item.
what, right, if we can reduce it by, no, but we'll have this discussion at the time.
Maybe,
So-
You know, it was easier when it was bedrooms. It was easier.
No, I like the way,
There wasn't a law.
I like, yeah, I like it the way it is. John, you have others?
I have more.
Yeah. Yes,
I think it might be easier to think about this item if we knew how many or how many current permits right now would be granted a maximum occupancy of more than 12.
That's what Dan's asking.
can we figure that
I
out?
can't give you the number right now, but
Yeah.
But for the town board meeting, we could have
it'll
it.
take
Yeah.
time to go through each one, but we could.
Is that okay? Would you mind doing that?
Patient.
We'll be patient. Because I think that's an important issue. If it's a non-issue, then it's a non-issue, you know? And I do not want to throw more for you guys to
No,
do,
no,
so.
let's do it.
Right.
That was, see, when it was bedroom, the reason I'm jokingly saying when it was easier when it was bedrooms, because the reason that I originally was thinking it and the 12 number in my brain was that, you know, 12 occupants was a 4-bedroom home, you know, and 14 occupants would be a 7-bedroom home, you know, or whatever, but no, I did that wrong. 5-bedroom home.
Yeah.
But it was based on the bedroom and it was easier to say, okay, we don't have a lot of 7-bedroom houses or 6-bedroom houses in the town. That's gonna be, you know, so and so many properties as opposed to 4-bedroom houses.
But from these guys' standpoint, if you, like you say, got a big loft
Yeah.
and now that's 1 bedroom and you're gonna put
Exactly.
2 people in that, that's not fair. I mean, that
So
totally is
this
not
is-
fair,
it's
yeah.
It's
Yeah, it
changed.
doesn't-
Yeah.
But it's-
John, go ahead.
Under 201-9, the third bullet, the zoning inspector is authorized to suspend a short-term rental permit
Yeah.
if lack of compliance with this chapter is habitual.
Habitual.
Define habitual.
Yes,
I
how
think that
many
we ought to put a
violations? I
note
think.
number in there rather than,
I have the exact
habitual.
same thing. I think we need to define how many violations.
I think Mike's about to give you habitual.
No, I'm sorry.
So is that better
Yeah, like
for,
17.
is that better for the staff to have a number or habitual?
it puts the staff in a position of
Is it
liability.
habitual, right?
Because what if
So-
he says, you've done it twice and you're habitual, but
Yeah.
I've done it 4 times
Why
and
don't
I'm
we just
not.
take
Exactly.
habitual
So-
ongoing out of it?
What's the number for habitual then? Is it 4? Is it,
We defined it as
Yeah, we
being
defined
2 the last
two
time.
Last time.
2 seems low.
Two what? Two complaints.
2 complaints.
Of the same
Complaints
nature.
or violations? Complaints may come.
I think
in
you gotta go
and-
violation.
Violation.
I think you have to say violations.
Are we talking violations as in written violations or judicial violations? Cause I can write 17 complaint, every time I get a complaint, it pretty much has a
Yeah.
violation.
I think it should be your discretion. I don't think it should be a number. Cause I think you
That's-
should,
That's the tough part.
it's
is-
gotta be what type of violation it is.
So let me throw another scenario out. I don't want a short-term rental next to me. I keep calling on whatever. Now, those are violations that you can
No,
write those.
Just complaints,
Yes.
So, all right, so we can't say complaints.
which are
then.
unfounded, basically.
Right,
So it's
What
gotta
Just
be,
because you don't like it doesn't mean they're doing anything
right.
wrong.
Yeah.
Lack of.
it's gotta be
It's gotta
violation
be-
somewhere.
Yeah. They're doing something
Right.
that violates the.
This law.
Written
right.
So could it
This
be
law.
more, I mean, more than 2 violations of the same section of code or whatever? it is?
Can it just be basic, like if you violate the short-term rental law? Which would result in violation based on a complaint being filed, right?
The problem is,
Regardless of which part.
the problem is having
Number.
It's gotta be.
fire
so-
extinguisher is different than having 3 events, you know,
Yeah,
that's
and I
the
think
problem.
The biggest thing is the penalties section underneath. If it's really like you're holding an event every single weekend,
That's
sooner than later, that $1,000 fine is gonna get really upsetting.
Right,
Or one of the town justices is gonna get mad at me and just say, hey, fix this. That's really where I think it is. I mean, I hate to be that person, but we have that fine built in there to hopefully stop that.
so,
If it's a health
Why
safety,
not?
that's a double what you're doing.
Yeah.
In B here, where it says, zoning inspector is authorized to issue notice of violation and or order to remedy in the event of lack of compliance with this chapter. Recurring instances may result in suspension of the SDR permit. just combine the two and make it
But
up to
make-
you guys
make
and
it
what
like
you
a subset.
zoning inspector, or code enforcement see. That,
I'm sorry. didn't follow.
I would still leave another one that just, okay, I understand for the suspension, but as far as the risk for health, safety or life safety, general welfare,
well.
I believe that by itself, just so that I had that discretion.
We'll make that
That's-
a separate.
Yep.
Make that
Yeah,
a
split it
separate,
up, yeah.
question I have. For you guys is, the zoning inspector and code enforcement officer, I mean, who's primarily responsible for enforcing, I mean, they're interchanged.
That was my next question.
I had,
I didn't read about
we all have the same thing.
it's. The zoning, when the application comes in, who does it go to?
Zoning.
Zoning.
It's kind of like,
Michael.
it involves both, but
Right.
it hits, Kristen is one of our zoning inspectors. She kind of handles all the short-term rentals. It hits her desk first. She'll review it and make sure it complies with the basic rules. Some of which Mike has helped, given her the information. She'll look at the bedroom size and based on what she's been told by Mike, you know, it's, well, right now it's 2 people per bedroom, but with these changes, we're already looking into this and kind of trying to figure it out. You know, how many it's gonna be and all that. Mike and Francesca look at it from their perspective under the code, right? I mean, it's both, which is why they're both in here, but it allows a simple short-term rental permit to be issued by the zoning inspector without every single one having to go through the code enforcement officer for issuance. Like, it doesn't, with building permits, they're issued by a code enforcement officer, never a zoning inspector. Short-term rentals, I guess, the intent originally was that we didn't have to have it issued by a code enforcement officer. But they're all gonna be, I mean, Mike can be involved in many of them, if Kristen asks for support and review.
Well,
It kind of
I
says
mean, it says
in 2014 and.
who's gonna go look, you know, to issue a notice of violation, if it's a violation has to be observed rather than some paperwork violation. Who goes and looks at it? Zoning inspector or?
Either or, and we
It's
left
a-
that,
So-
we left that very broad for the reason that timing,
They define in
It's-
2014, the very, back at the beginning, they define any zoning inspector or code enforcement officer of the town of Canandaigua is a quote unquote zoning inspector.
Yeah.
So that's defined earlier.
Then we, yeah, I know that that's in there, but then we. These items are specific, zoning inspector, code enforcement officer.
Yeah, they are.
Just to nobody reading this is not familiar with the day-to-day operation.
there's still, so the zoning inspector is still either zoning or myself or Francesca. The only one that's not is the code enforcement officer. Because zoning inspectors aren't allowed to write appearance tickets,
Aren't allowed to what?
write appearance tickets.
That answered that question.
Mm-hmm.
201-10 penalties. And I'm saying this in reference to what we just talked about as far as being habitual, right? So we don't define habitual, and we don't define whether it's 1, 2, 10 violations that they suspend the short-term permit. And under this penalties, we don't determine how many violations a person has to have before they're fined. So does that mean every violation they're going to be fined? And who determines whether they are truly in violation? Are we the arresting officer and the judge?
No, I think Mike writes the violation and then it
So-
goes in front of a judge.
Yeah, so, I'll be honest with you, I got 32 of these on my desk right now. I write up a criminal complaint, I write up an appearance ticket that goes down here to this floor, gets signed by one of the 2 justices, we schedule for a court date, then the judge decides whether they get the fine or not.
So this would be after going to court, that those fines would happen.
No, this would be,
He would write,
Same day.
he would write the fine, right?
So these
Well, but
violations,
They wouldn't have, it's not gonna happen, you're not gonna start finding those 32 violations now until they come before the judge, is what I'm saying.
no, the violations are automatic. I don't write a violation unless I know there's.
Okay,
They
so
go to-
I'm in violation right now, let's say. I get a letter in the mail, it says you're subject to this being a misdemeanor
Yep.
because you didn't get your short-term rental permit and you're renting it out.
Do I have to start paying $500 a day now or
No.
after I go to the judge?
Once you go to the judge.
Okay.
And is it no warnings?
No.
So this just goes to a violation state.
But that's Mike's judgment.
That's how the town.
That's how,
That
but that's how
is-
every code
Can I
section.
give you a for instance?
Yeah,
A lot of the ones on his desk right now are because we've sent previous,
Yeah.
multiple
letters.
notices that you're operating a short-term rental, you didn't get a permit, can you please get a permit? They ignored that, send them another one, hey, we let you know you're operating a short-term rental, you're listing it, you haven't gotten a permit yet, please come get a permit, here's how to do it, you know. They know, they're ignoring the
You're
town.
being gracious. The way this is written,
Yeah.
You don't have to be gracious.
you don't have to be
So-
gracious. And then it becomes
No.
again subjective rather than,
It's the way the software works.
Well,
yeah, but I don't care about software. I care about the people.
I
right?
care about the software because we're doing this every day.
Right, but my point is that this says if a person has 5 cars parking and 2 of them are on a lawn because they only have 3 spots, he could write 2 violations. And it could be $1,000.
But they're not, their
Per day?
these violations are going through. You're talking about something else. They don't have a short-term rental. We've sent a thing. We're trying to be nice. He's not gonna be nice.
That's not what this says.
but that goes back to the fact that you said about being neighborly. If they're not being neighborly, do we, I hate to be that person,
It becomes
but I write up violations.
Mike, I understand you, right? What about when you're not here anymore? Or what about if there's a second guy and the second guy's not a good guy?
But it doesn't.
Okay,
but
this says if they get a violation, it's gonna cost them $500 and then $1,000 a day.
Yes,
That's what it says. Is that what we wanna
right
do?
now it says 350, no matter what. So
well,
those 32 times 350.
but it also says that it shall be punishable by a fine.
Yes.
But that's up to the discretion of the
The
judge.
judge.
That's under that
right.
criminal procedure
Right.
law 150.
So it may be punishable,
Shall-
not shall be.
Shall
No,
is pretty
it
strong
has to be
wording.
shall. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
straight shall,
And the way-
because the reason is, and state just changed this, so
No, we just-
years and years and years and years and years and years and years, we've had town justices, and I'm not on our town justice, it's state law that was changed recently. Town justices are elected. Town justices, when they would get a code violation, it's $1,000 a day for the violation, just like this. You don't have house numbers up, it's $1,000 a day till you get them. Town justices would say, well, I get it, that's a fine, $1 a day. The state now said, no, that's not right. Because they were doing that for a lot of things. So now the state has required us to put minimums and stuff like this. And it's no longer well, you could get this, it's, no, you violated. Because they're putting the trust back in the CEO saying, don't write a violation letter, don't write an appearance ticket until it's a violation that you can take before a judge, just like if you're gonna put handcuffs on someone.
And the shall, I mean, the training I just got, shall is like will, it's not may, it's not might, it's you will do
So
this.
there is subjectivity in it because depending on the demeanor of that person, maybe you may back off a little bit and hesitate to write something.
Not with shall, that's what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying.
From a code?
Before you get.
Well,
to
that would
point
be-
of Writing.
So that would be up to the supervisor of that code enforcement officer, whether it be the town board or the lead code enforcement officer, the town manager, so on and so forth, to say, here's this section of code, why aren't you following? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it just takes into account because they get a of the action.
No, believe it or not, no. They caught it because my previous employment, I had the same situation. You get these apartment buildings. They go on and on and on and on. And the biggest line that gets said all the time and gets reported in court is, I'll just pay the fine. It's cheaper to pay the fine than it is to fix the roof on the building. It's cheaper to fix or to pay the fine than to do this. Just how it is. So.
I
Don't violate any.
I have one more thing, can I bring up one more?
I
Still
think
going.
that this deserves more conversation before we move on, because what this says is if I have one too many cars parking in that parking lot, I will be fined $500.
At the discretion of the judge.
It doesn't say that, it
It does.
It says-
That's the code enforcement officer.
it's at the discretion of the code enforcement officer, and if it's written into the code, what I thought I just heard Mike say is that the judge no longer can go and say it's gonna I'm whittling it down to $1 a day. It's
But he
$500
could
bucks.
he could dismiss the violation.
No, it's either you're guilty or not.
You're
Right,
guilty or not,
right.
So if you
$500 or
have a
not,
Car over, you're still guilty.
right?
Right. So, and do we not want that?
Then, that's the whole,
I just think
that's the
it's,
biggest issue. I'm
it's-
having.
it's pretty punitive,
What would
particularly when you
rather have?
add $1,000 a day to it. So if we send them a notice to correct and they don't correct for a day, now it's $1,500.
Are the fine numbers defined?
What do you define?
The 500 and 1,000, is that defined or are
That's
we
the
defining that
judgment,
here?
that's the judgment for the judge.
Okay,
It's
so
between
my,
500
no, my question is, could it be 100 to 1,000? Or no?
Let me say this,
Defined.
why don't we write some language in where we warn the short-term renter that they are in violation of the code? And if they don't correct the situation, then we issue them a violation.
I can tell you that you already have that,
I'm sure we do.
because, so. Yes, because. I had to schedule a court date a month and a half out. I have to issue my appearance tickets and I have to serve you my criminal complaint no less than 30 days out. So that gives you 30 days to go through and solve that issue. Now, if we were doing an order of remedy, New York State says I have to give you 30 days plus 30 days, 60 plus that.
Well, I'm even thinking about the workload, Mike. I mean, if we send out a friendly warning letter, I think that's a hell of a lot more neighborly than just going and writing a violation first time out. I mean, there's a lot to be said about appearances too. And if the appearance is that, you know, the town of Canandaigua is hard nosed about a lot of these things, that doesn't serve our community well.
It's a law, though. I mean.
Well, that's-
I understand.
They want to pass a law.
But you
At that
could
point-
you could send a warning letter. And if they don't correct, we issue a violation.
The impression we want to give is that if you're playing amongst the rules,
Here's
you're
the
gonna have no
rules.
problem whatsoever.
Right.
If you're not playing against the rules, you're gonna have a big freaking problem.
Right.
But a lot of people don't even know what those rules are.
That's,
Law,
you know,
operate
that's.
short-term rental.
You should know the rules. You should know that there's
Running
fines that are
business.
gonna be there, right? I mean, we talk about, we don't want this, we don't want events, we don't want this parking, but we don't wanna fine them for it. I think we have to fine them for
Well,
it.
we
That's
have-
gonna end it right there.
We're having a hard time even defining an event. So, I mean,
Well, what would happen if somebody did have that one car over? And at the end of the week, those people all left.
You're in
By the
violation.
next week. They remedied it because they run into somebody like this too.
Then they would go,
So is
for-
that the remedy?
they would go before the judge and they would make that case and say, hey, we've solved this.
Because it may vary, I mean, the number.
We have
So they
set
run it,
bad
they go in
records.
front of the judge, they solve for that. What's the fine?
At that, it's out, I can't speak towards that.
Oh, okay. So you
Basically,
don't know.
what I can speak towards is I see a violation.
Right,
you
right,
feel
right,
that
right.
violation, I
At
send
a
a
point in
letter.
time.
Now, let's use these 32 for example, that's 32 without permits. Now, the way I see it, the way that we've discussed it in the offices, is the only way to get out of that $350 fine is you walk into that courtroom, your specified time,
Here's my
holding up a
permit.
permit,
Yeah.
otherwise,
We kind of want that, right?
And that's-
Don't we want that?
yeah, so that's the tough part. Now, if you go through and you say, hey, you've had a car parked there for a week.
Yeah.
We've gone through the complaint process, we've gone through the notice of violation, all that's been there. And it still was there for 7 days, that's 7 counts of that violation.
Well, it's like, yeah, and it's like, that sometimes the issue, the violation is kind of a quote unquote permanent violation, like not having a permit. Or you didn't put in your smoke detectors or whatever. Sometimes it's a more, transient problem, like you had an event or you parked too many cars or what have you. That's the issue, is that it's the problem solved before they get to court.
Murph, don't you also have the option of revoking or suspending your permit?
Yeah, that's the other thing.
I mean, that would be less
I can't
intense
revoke,
than
we only
fine.
have suspend.
Suspension, right?
Okay, well, then if they continue to operate, then you hit them with the
So,
violation.
yeah, I mean, I see that.
There's different degrees here. I mean, people not having a permit is one of the big issues we're trying to get at.
It says you can.
I see that different as having one car over to the limit is being
So Mike, is there discretion?
That's why we have misdemeanors and felonies, right?
Mike, is there
Yeah,
discretion?
Class A,
You
Class
go
B.
to the site, you get a complaint, one car over the limit.
Mhm.
Do you write that violation right there, you say, or do you say, hey, I've got 2 cars, if I come tomorrow, violation?
We can't think like that, because to John's point, I
He doesn't
might
have
not
that
be here
time.
tomorrow.
Right.
So, no, it's a violation.
Violation, boom, right out
The
of the
way
way.
that this is, you get a violation.
That point in time.
Take my name off it, my face
Right,
off
right.
it. You're
It's a
gonna get
violation.
This could turn into a real money maker.
Yeah, we didn't put that in the first, remember when I said it? We could use one of our purposes, like, I don't know, I mean.
All right, so we've been here a while, so we gotta finish this thing to get people out.
We don't say anything about sewer in this, why?
So what?
Sewer, well,
Septic.
septic.
Isn't it in?
Yeah.
Septic.
I thought it was
That's
in.
what I was gonna ask, the proof of.
Yeah, that's somewhere. I
Yeah,
thought
recent,
that.
recent inspection.
Under D.
I just feel
Yeah.
like we're moving on, Dave, but we really haven't brought things to close.
Proof of septic system, that's it.
And I
Well-
think this is an important issue. And I think we need to have some closure on this.
On which item?
The violation.
This violations. I mean, up above it, 3 bullets above it, he's got the opportunity to suspend.
Oh, yeah.
We don't tell them how many violations before they suspend, they just say habitual. And now down here, we're saying the moment they're in violation, we're gonna issue a ticket, and it's gonna cost you $500. And
If
it's
they don't
violated-
have a fire, detector or smoke detector, I want them to write the ticket. You
But
know,
they don't have
if
a
they
law.
have 1 too many cars, I want them to write the ticket. At what point in time do you not want them to write the ticket? I don't, that's what I don't understand. If
I-
we have a law and it says, if you don't obey this law, you're gonna get this fine, why have the law?
Well, Dave, to that point. Laws have graduation, right? So if you're a felon, you could be a class A felon, a class B felon, same thing with misdemeanors. We don't differentiate here. We just say if you're in violation, this is what it costs. And I think that we should be as neighbor friendly as we want the renters and the rentees to be as a town. And I think to take a hard line on it,
So if I'm the neighbor of the short-term rental and they're always parking on my,
Always.
but,
so you said always.
right,
What if they did it one time?
right, then he'd have to catch that car there that one.
And what
time.
happens if that one time they correct it and they say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, or the renter made a mistake. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again.
Habitual.
If
Then
they,
you get to the habitual.
if the
Now that-
code enforcement officer goes out and there's a violation, I want a ticket written. That's my vote. I mean,
We have a
we
difference of
can,
opinion.
we can go, I mean,
That's how sorry to interject, that's how every code is. Every code that this town board has passed does not have you get a warning here.
Doesn't mean that we can't do that for this.
I understand that, but I would strongly urge against it. Because how many warnings? Now we're going down that slope, and
I'd
then,
say one.
but is it one warning per type of violation, or is it you get one warning of violation?
I'd say one warning of violation.
So if you get one parking violation, that's a warning.
That's a
But
warning.
then someone puts a sign on the property, that's an automatic violation.
At least you've given them a warning that there are rules and regulations relative to the short-term renter. And when you give them that warning, you could go and hand them a package and say, here's the rules and regulations. Don't be in violation again, because if you are,
Which
there's a $500 fine.
we give them that now when they apply.
They have to
apply for the
sign-
permit.
they have to sign an attestation saying that they
I saw
will,
that in here.
so that's already taken care of.
I understand, but you're talking about not the people that own the property. You're talking about people that are using the property.
The fines go to the person who
No,
owns it.
that's not what I'm saying.
Johnny's saying the people, it's
The-
different
the
people
people that
every
are
week,
gonna-
they aren't
That's
gonna
right.
necessarily be
Well,
paying.
that's
attention
right.
to it.
And that's all.
But you demand
Brian,
a
yeah, I
security.
was just gonna ask him.
You demand a security deposit, don't you, Brian, from some people?
We,
or
we take,
anyone, or-
we don't take cash deposits, we take credit cards.
But is there a security clause in your
Yeah,
rental?
Yeah, they're
agreement? So
accountable for,
If somebody does something, destroys a TV set or incurs a violation, can you? take
it's
that?
a great question. For damage, we have damage waiver, which is like a trip insurance thing. People pay a small amount and that covers damages. For violations, we've never addressed that, but maybe we'll have to.
Have
We-
you
we-
ever?
We've never been fined, I've never
That's what
been
I'm saying.
fined.
Right,
it's never gotten to that point. Again, the process can, and I look at the process as a healthy process for owners to pay taxes and guests to come experience the area as they like to do. We're talking about the negative, which is, in my world, is very small part of it.
Mhm.
So,
I don't think the complaints are gonna come in unless it is a habitual thing. Like you think about, you
Oh,
know,
I don't know about that.
well,
I got some people that have contacted me, and I don't mean to interrupt, I apologize. I got some people that are just chomping at the bit to go and complain against a short-term rental, regardless of what they do.
So
I
right
think we all
now,
were in
right
receipt
now-
of some of those emails.
just
Right.
because they complain doesn't mean they're actually in violation.
right,
Yeah.
That's true.
so right now we have a code enforcement, there's a fine, correct? And so how many of those fines have been levied, have been collected?
We've never brought a short-term rental before the judge since
Right.
this law. was
So,
passed.
so we're
But you got
arguing about
32 of
something.
them that I heard you say
Yeah.
that you're preparing to have issued.
Yeah.
Right, so we never had a short-term rental ordinance up until six
Right.
months ago,
But
a year ago,
2022.
21.
2 years
Right
ago.
before I got
And
it.
was there a fine in that ordinance? I
Yes.
don't know, either. There was,
So because it was a special use permit, it goes to the special use permit enforcement, which for the first offense is 350 or 15 days in jail. Second offense is 750 or 30 days in jail. Third offense is $1,000 or 60 days.
There is a section here, B, that says zoning inspector is authorized to issue or code enforcement. Note of violation and or order to remedy. So you could see that one car, say, hey, you gotta fix this thing. I'll be back tomorrow, and if it's still there, I'm gonna issue a violation. Is that a
So
scenario that could play out?
I think it's, the way it's on paper is not the way that it really works out. I write the violation if I see it. Just because I schedule a court date doesn't mean that we show up. This happens all the time where I issue an appearance ticket. I can tell you, I've issued 5 appearance tickets for the town, and I've yet to go before any of the justices, because that's the final step of, oh, yeah, I got it. I'll
It's
fix it, I'll
rectified.
fix it, I'm sorry. At that point, I walk down here, rip it up, we're all done. It's done. That's really how the process goes. It's not like I'm out there with a ticket book, like a parking ticket, where it's, no, you're you're done. It's over with. Here's your fine, pay it, you're gone. That process is built into the way that just the system works.
It's like a final notice.
It's exactly like the system is just built that way. We can't change it.
we have a short-term rental guy right here that has no violations.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think it's reality is that we hope it doesn't happen, but if it has to happen, I wanna come down on them with both feet. Honestly, I do.
Well, it depends. To me, it depends on the seriousness of the violation.
And we'll throw that at the judge to
But
decide that.
but that's already, that's in here, it says,
Yeah.
and or order to remedy, order to remedy can be, I
Fix it.
don't, you're violating us, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, an order remedy is,
Then-
yeah, an order remedy is just very specific. I gotta tell you how to fix it. An order violation is you're a violator.
Terry, I'd be very comfortable if that was the first action.
Well, it says it's possible. It
It's
doesn't say
possible, it doesn't say it is.
that it
Hey,
is.
Joan, is your concern if we don't have fabulous code enforcement officers? Is your concern that there could be someone that works for the town that could be overzealous, let's put it that way? Is that where your concern
In
is
part,
coming from?
but I also think that, we're taking the discretion away from the code enforcement officer. We're telling them if there's a violation, he's got to write a violation. That's what it says.
but that's what he's doing now.
That's, yeah.
Yeah,
It's what he's-
and we've never done this before, and you are using Premier Properties as the example. That's not.
No,
the
he's the
people that are gonna be in
Right,
violation.
No, I
Right.
totally get that part of it, right, yeah, I'm not, but we have somebody here who does it, that's all we have, and we don't have the people that are doing it wrong, we've got the people here that are doing it right,
Right,
so
that's correct, and I
Still
think
the right
that,
law,
you know,
people do it wrong.
a lot of people do it wrong.
Well,
And,
that's what we're trying to write.
and-
honestly, I want those violations written, I'll be honest with you, I don't understand why,
Most people
we're-
aren't gonna be in county.
yeah.
And the 32, the reason why we're doing that is because I sat in the last, how many ordinance committees, and it was, well, what are we doing about the extra ones that are
Yes.
permitted? What are we doing? And
We're
they-
doing something.
And these are only the 32 that have gotten notices from
Yeah.
2022, 2023, 2024.
Yeah.
Or that have not paid for a renewal of the permit. So
It's hard to argue with that.
Then I
Is-
think, then if that's the case, then I think you gotta modify what is my number Z that says that notice of violation and or order to remedy. Because I think we're putting the town at risk. You can't go and say, okay, I'm gonna give one guy a notice to remedy and I'm gonna give another guy a violation.
they come at the same time. So the order to remedy, the only reason why that's in there,
And then that's not what this says. If that comes at the same time, then we ought to rewrite Z.
no, so the notice of violation is only written for town code issues. So if you, and that is, this is state law, a notice of violation is only written for town code issues. The order to remedy is state code. That is your fire extinguisher is out of date, your smoke detector's not installed.
That's not what it says here. It says,
Okay, so maybe the word in order should be taken out.
No, because we do write
This is
them.
not always-
and this says specifically to this chapter.
But if you say a notice of violation and order to remedy, you're saying both are written at the same time.
Not all the time.
Depends what they're.
I
violating.
get that, but not, so like, perfect example, I just wrote one for. Put up a structure without a building permit, right? So that is state code and town code. Both of you say that it needs to be permitted. Now, it's also a fire code issue.
But let's talk about
That's what we're-
specific to
So
this,
you sure what I'm saying?
specific to this chapter, Mike. I have one too many cars in my driveway.
Yeah.
Item 201-9, second bullet, says that you will issue me a violation for that.
Yeah.
Or you're gonna give me an order to remedy.
Yes.
Which is it?
That's at the discretion of the zoning inspector.
Can't be.
It
You're
is.
putting it down at risk.
How's that putting the town at risk?
Because if you write him a violation for having a car parked, one too many cars parked, and you don't write me a violation for it, then it's arbitrary and capricious.
So I think
No,
this,
you'd still get a violation.
That's not what this says.
That is what that says.
It does not. It says you will do one or the other.
Yes.
I think this is a Chris Nadler question.
Ask Chris Nadler.
Then
Yes.
let's leave this there and ask him that, because, I mean, we got the guy who's boots on the ground.
And I think we ought to also ask Chris Nadler what he thinks about whether we should, his opinion about issuing a violation first offense.
And he's the one who put
That's
this together.
Chris's debate.
I understand, but
So-
still, we can point it out to him.
So
That's good.
I'll contact Chris. Violation for first offense. What else?
The
Second,
second bullet under
201
201-9.
201-9B on mine,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you want to know and or.
and or,
Want to know the meaning of the word and the meaning of the word.
which one are we gonna do? Because
then
the
the
bottom
other-
one says penalty violation, period,
So,
and
The other one,
B says violation or an order to remedy.
the other one was that 207 or the 201-7. Currently as J, should be L, should we strike that or not? That was from Adler. So that was the one about the fully insured thing. It was sort of duplicating. So it's as J currently on our.
Yeah, I see that.
So that's an Adler.
I think you ought to ask him about habitual, which would be item C under 201-9, as far as you've got it noted.
Yeah, I thought we were gonna leave that in there on J.
Let's see what he has to say about
209
habitual, because I think
habitual.
that's subjective.
Habitual. And then events. That was maybe the difference.
Events, yes.
Yeah. And I do think we should add, it kind of got glossed over earlier, but way back in the beginning, this is very easy. So 201-5D was the septic system. We need to say, it says proof of a septic system capacity, or that they're on town sewer, because.
It's applicable, if they're on town sewer, then it's.
Oh, if applicable, okay, fine. So-
So that's strike.
What form does it proof of this? Septic, is that just?
They do an inspection, right?
Well, no, I mean, well,
We don't, you do the most recent inspection, so they look at.
proof of the capacity, wouldn't that be in the file for the?
Say,
Permitting.
not all the times.
Overall,
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised what we have and what we don't have. So.
When the property sells, they have to get an inspection.
Sale or
So,
if you're. in
Well,
the-
I'll ask Chris these questions and we'll get something back out.
don't forget to, we need to, before this comes to the town's board, this has to be reviewed by the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, the ECB. And the code enforcement every house is about them too, but those boards have to look at it, and what's their comments before it comes to the town's board.
I think the only insistence on will occur would be April.
When you set the public hearing, after that is when it's referred.
Does this have to go before the county?
Once the
Once
town
we've written
board
it, right?
has, when you set the
Once-
public hearing, it gets sent to the internal boards in the county after that and before it comes back for the actual public hearing to take place.
True. Before this is finalized.
Probably,
It's a bet.
At the best.
probably, yeah. Until that point, we gotta work on our 3-year ones. That's gonna be wonderful and confusing. It's 3 years for now, but that's gonna be
No.
1 year. I still don't think.
We wore these people out on Zoom. That's, anything else?
Ordinance is always nice and short, quick meetings.
Yeah, we've got to pare this down from 3 hours to something more manageable as well.
I just want to thank you for allowing me to contribute and
Yeah.
for the time you guys have taken to really think this through.
Well, we
We appreciate your input, we really do. Thank you. Just a motion to adjourn.
Whoa.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.